I'm going to start with footage from a videotaped interview. These are the last few seconds when one of the false accusers thinks that the recording is done.
So this is good evidence?
Well, you tell me.
I think so, because I mean, y'all, even if he didn't even rape nobody or nothing, he's been in contact with people that he was arrested.
Private investigator Brian Bates, who has done most of the groundwork to get this evidence to the public, introduced this footage into the trial where even the prosecutor hadn't seen it before. Now, when you watch this, mostly people see a woman who just finished making a statement to police admit that she hadn't actually been raped. What I see is slightly different, but more important. I see a police officer, Rocky Gregory, being told that the statement is false and pursuing charges based on a witness that he knows is lying. You must never forget those few seconds of tape.
Well, you tell me.
I think so, because I mean, y'all, even if he didn't even rape nobody or nothing.
That is proof of police corruption. I've put it up front because you need to know how this case was built, and it was built with malice. As Brian Bates says to Michelle Melkin,
they lied on the stand, they lied to the jury, they're involved in civil lawsuits where they may collect millions. This is an injustice, and the public doesn't want to be bothered with it.
in this video, I'm only going to focus on the sex crimes detectives because everything else we'll be discussing is a result of their bungling, unethical behavior. Meet lead detective Kim Davis. She'll explain why she and her buddy Rocky manufactured victims.
When you have one victim, I believed her, but we don't always get things done when you have one victim, but when you have 13, and the MO's the same, and the verbiage is the same, it just becomes a little bit more believable.
Now, Kim Davis is the Roscoe P. Coltrane of the OKCPD.
And so I get this anonymous phone call about a flying saucer.
If you don't know Roscoe, go watch some Dukes of Hazzard.
But I wasn't looking for any flying saucers because I don't believe in them.
So let's have a look at how they got their accusers to give them a story, the story they wanted. They went through the names of people that Daniel had called in while he was on patrol and started interviewing black women who had drug or prostitution records. They contacted all of them, telling them in advance that they believed the women might have been sexually assaulted by a police officer. Not a very good idea. Here is Rocky refusing to accept no for an answer. Brian Bates and Michelle Melkin help us count the times that she says nothing ever happened to her.
Have you ever come to any contact where an officer has been inappropriate?
No.
Have you ever had to expose yourself to them?
No.
Okay.
But,
You wasn't asked to, if you had any drugs on you, anything like that, and you had to...
expose myself?
Mm-hmm.
But I know what you're talking about.
That's the clap and shake.
No. I haven't had... How did you get my name anyway on something like this? Because I haven't really been on the streets and stuff that much. There's only one officer that I know a few years back. He was a black cop. They used to come around here. He exposed himself to me. I hope I helped you, but like I said,
You did. You did.
So Rocky says that's helpful, but it's not. Daniel's not black. He's half white and half Japanese, but mostly he just looks white. Good old Rocky. Well, he's got excuses for all of them. Listen to him explain away why one of the supposed victims didn't name a location they could pin Daniel to, and why she eventually remembered the location he wanted her to pick.
She actually told me a wrong location to kind of throw me off a little bit.
There were several calls that came in during that week, and they were all at night.
The reason why is because she knew we was going to dig into it, and she didn't want the boyfriend to know that she fell off the wagon.
Now, the accuser he's talking about here, well, she didn't actually have a boyfriend. That was part of the problem. She's a schizophrenic who was harassing an ex-boyfriend who'd broken up with her. That's why the police were called in the first place. The ex-boyfriend called because the woman was high on crack, damaging the dude's truck while accusing him of sleeping around on her because he had a new girlfriend.
She had no motive at all to make this up.
Did you investigate? Yes. No, yes, I did. Listen, I did it. I investigated.
So Davis and Gregory created their own victim profile, one that didn't even match the original accuser. I'm going to do separate videos on each of the accusers. They chose a victim profile of women who would be most likely to cooperate with them and give them a false statement. You know, ex-cons who were vulnerable black women with a history of prostitution and drug abuse.
A police investigation turned fishing expedition that dredged up more than a dozen accusers.
That's why I went down near the swamp, because, you know, that is where you find swamp gas.
Remember, not only does their manufactured profile not match the first accuser, they admit that they got multiple false accusers, and the number of false accusers increased as the media started flashing Daniel's face and the accusations on TV.
Welcome to part 4 episode. Just wanted to play a little bit. There's a lot more to get into, but I wanted to welcome Katie. Welcome, Katie. How are you?
I am well.
Welcome, Harry B. Harry B, welcome. Glad to have you back on the panel and talking about Daniel Holtzclaw, episode 4.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
I kind of want to get the law enforcement perspective on that intro we just did right now, if you don't mind, HB. What's your thoughts so far on the profiling and the case creation and a lot of fabrication, in my opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I've watched all 4 parts. The previous 3 parts, and there seemed to be some definitely bias from the female lead detective, and she had a narrative. It seemed to be picked out already to go after Daniel. There's a lot of, and you guys started doing it last week in that part 3 episode where you dissect each of the 14 victims and their stories and how they fall apart. And it is disturbing. Like I said, I don't know what his original grounds of appeal was brought up on. But it's like, to me, it seems there'd be enough inconsistencies just in that alone.
We're going to talk about the appeal process and what happened with that, the behind door meeting. We have all that going on. I wanted to ask Katie about this investigator we're looking at with the dunce look on her face, which is a common look she's had during this whole process. What's her background like? We on this channel, we use the word tyrant a lot. Did she have a tyrannical behavior prior to this? What was like the resume for this woman? Any red flags?
Well, I never heard anything like that about her, but it was interesting on one of Eric Cozy's YouTube videos that he did. There was a comment that said the reason this happened to Holtzclaw is because he didn't play nice in the Armstrong case. According to, I can't remember if it was Sergeant Patton or whatever that said. And then someone else commented on the heels of that and said, I don't really like to destroy people. I'm paraphrasing. I don't like to destroy people on social media. And I thought about not saying anything, but I went to school with Kim Davis, and she doesn't have the capacity to feel for anyone. She's a narcissistic person herself. So basically it was interesting to him to see her calling Holtzclaw those things. So I don't really have any background on her other than, she became a cop because she needed something exciting in her life, and sitting behind a desk was too boring for her. She had a really unremarkable career in that the Holtzclaw case obviously was the biggest case of her career.
I just look at the style, the interview style, and I say this isn't the first time she's done it, Harry, right?
Oh, I definitely agree. Kate, you mentioned before, I know he had some complaints of excessive force and stuff in his personnel file.
Mm-hmm.
What was his reviews like from his superiors and his sergeant and stuff?
They
what were those reviews?
Yeah, they were all good. And and let's be clear about the use of force charges were self-reported in almost all of the cases. It wasn't that the person he was arresting reported him. So he was going by the book, maybe too much. I don't know. I'm sorry, I trailed off. What was what part of your question did I not answer just now?
No, I was just curious what the reviews are like from his
Oh,
superiors.
One of the reviews that I read just said that they called him in to discuss what I'm assuming it was use of force or whatever it was, but I think it said he's an enthusiastic officer who took the comment from his superior in, and he will do better. I wish I could.
No, I understand. I think it's
but
just
basically none of his superiors had anything bad to say about him. They actually couldn't find anyone to say anything bad about him, even when they went back to the college town where he played football, high school. They just couldn't find anything.
Was he simply an honest, naive kid who was literally too honest for his own good?
Well, he's still too honest for his own good.
Wow.
Yeah. And even though he's this huge guy, he's really he's a really quiet, he's soft-spoken. His heritage, his mom is Japanese, and he was raised in a household where you walk the line, kind of, you do what's right, you work hard, there wasn't a lot of yelling in his household, and
right.
he was a leader on and off the football field, and people that knew him described him as a quiet leader.
I was talking to El Sancho about this. I still am on the fence about guilt, innocent, and stuff. The one thing that stood out for me definitely was his reaction to when the charges were laid against him, and he was found guilty. His demeanor did not strike me that of a guilty person.
Right.
It was not faked. It was not staged for anybody.
Sure.
It was complete breakdown. That's definitely something that lays in my mind. It's like, usually when someone's guilty and the charges are read against them, they're like, all right, cool, you got me, fine, whatever. You could tell that Daniel was simply just distraught. He couldn't believe his life just came to this.
Yeah, he truly believed in the system, and even though he was frustrated with his defense attorney and felt like his defense attorney wasn't, standing up for him enough, he really believed that he was going to go home that day. And just to give you some insight I watched part of that reading of the verdict and all of that last night, and about never got to sleep. It's so disturbing. But you can see when you watch that video that there was a juror that he sensed that this female juror understood that he was innocent, and he felt like she was not, she would be his salvation, even if others on the jury were being bullied to go for the guilty verdict just because it was going on for too long and they wanted to go home because, we're at the holidays. I'm sure they had some Christmas shopping to do and stuff. But when he walked in, he saw the look on that juror's face, and he knew he was going to be found guilty at that point. So you can see him unraveling. You can actually, when you know that happened, and watch that video, you can see that happen on his face, and then you can watch his the physiological reaction that takes over his body.
How long did they deliberate?
I think it was 4 days.
Wow.
Well, kind of paint a picture of what was going on outside during this deliberation, because I think that's super crucial, Katie.
Well, we had Artists for Justice group that was a local Oklahoma City group put together. Black Lives Matter came in and joined that group. There was just a lot of protesting. The verdict came down on Daniel's birthday, December 10th. And so, there was cheering and they were singing happy birthday to him as he was being led back to the county jail after the verdict.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can someone please delete Gudo247's comment? One of the mods, please.
Thanks, mods. Oh.
I'm sorry, Kate, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't even notice.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, it was just a freaking circus, but it had been that way throughout the duration of the trial. We mentioned before that at one point, you could hear the protesters chanting outside the courtroom window, 36 counts, give him life, 36 racist cop, give him life. At one point, the judge had to stop and ask the jury to disregard what they were hearing. But, the city gave them a permit to protest out there, so figure that out.
I have a quick unrelated, HB, do you think Glitterbug would be a good mod on my channel?
Oh, absolutely.
You think so? Be honest.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You sure?
I'll vouch for her.
All right. Because if shit goes down, it's on you.
I know. All
right.
Was the jury sequestered by chance?
They were. So they deliberated the first
Kate,
day. They didn't come to a verdict or a decision. And so I think it was like the wee hours of the morning by the time they ended up having their family bring them clothes and getting into the hotel.
Wow. I mean, from what I've seen so far, I know Sancho's taking care of some other things. It seems like this was a snowball that simply got out of control and it kept growing and growing and growing, where this kid was found guilty before they even went to deliberate, it seems.
Well, he was found guilty. Kim Davis has said on many occasions that she knew he was guilty before she stepped into that 2-hour interview with him. So she knew he was guilty before she even talked to him.
Right.
So I kind of want to play a little bit more of this, and then we'll kind of jump into what we're going on. It kind of gives the people a good idea of what we're up against with Kim Davis and Rocky and everything like that.
Couple during, and then some came like during the trial and after the trial.
After it hit the media, we really had to be kind of protective as far as just absolutely even just believing anything. We had to really kind of dissect, because now it was out there. Some people thought of money or just wanted attention or however. I interviewed one male.
One male who said that Daniel
Holtzclaw.
And what was the outcome of that?
He admitted he lied.
Yeah.
Until now, the public never heard about the 7 or 8 accusers who claimed to have been assaulted after Daniel was already suspended from the police force.
After they saw it on the TV, they were like, ooh, I can get in on this. And
yeah, they were like, ee woo. We've already seen how Rocky can turn a black perpetrator into a white one and turn a location that didn't work for him into the right location. So, these allegations were outrageous if they dropped them.
Oh, people lie.
Rocky and Kim are even willing to go forward with an allegation after the woman tells them that she made it up. So the ones that they rejected were people that couldn't even be led into telling a lie that they could work with. And they just made those ones disappear.
Blip. Clear out of sight. Just blip.
Okay, now listen to Kim Davis explain why they didn't record the interview with the first accuser.
We don't record victim interviews except involving police officers. We never have recorded victim interviews.
Okay, but this one involved a police officer.
It did, but I had no recording. I had no equipment to record it, and it didn't even cross my mind to record it. We're in the middle of the hospital, and It's not something we do. We don't take a recorder to the hospital and do interviews.
Kim Davis is presented numerous times as some sort of super sleuth hero who managed to break a big case. But can she even use her own cell phone to record an event?
I wouldn't even know how to record on my phone if I did. You wouldn't? No, I have no idea.
Now, I think Kim is being honest about her stupidity, but dishonest about why the interview wasn't recorded.
I love this one.
Elsewhere, she tells us
awesome.
that she got a call saying a woman was claiming to have been assaulted by a police officer. So she knew from the very beginning, from when they woke her up with this phone call, that she should bring a recorder with her. But Kim didn't need technology because...
She says she had a gut feeling about what would become the biggest case of her career.
They'll be coming by here just any moment now. I can feel it in my bones.
And don't think that Rocky is the only one who says the description was a match when it wasn't. Here's Kim Davis taking a statement from an accuser who says that Daniel is a short black man.
Then there's Sherry Ellis, someone the jury believed, even though she told police her attacker looked nothing like Daniel.
Tell me your description of him.
He's black.
He's black male,
Muscular.
muscular. How tall could you tell? You're pretty tall. How tall are you? How tall are you?
5'11".
Is he taller than you or shorter than you?
Like right here, maybe. Like that.
So you think he's shorter than you?
Yeah.
But Daniel is 6'2" and light-skinned.
That's not a problem for Kim Davis, though, and apparently not for the jury either. They convicted Daniel for being a mythical short black man.
And then I got all these crazy little tiny teenster sounds in my head, and I thought I was going squirrely.
I'm going to finish here with a statement about police practices. That they don't record at least audio for all allegations of sexual assault
Is that you, Matt?
Well, it's
Yes,
horrendous.
it is. Awesome.
I have never
Welcome.
seen a police report that matches the actual statement. With these two clowns, Rocky left out all the times that woman, the one we heard earlier, well, he left out all the times she said she hadn't actually been assaulted. He also did not record, for obvious reasons, when the other accuser said she hadn't actually been raped at all. Let's watch that one again.
So this is good evidence?
Well, you tell me.
I think so, because I mean, y'all, even if he didn't even rape nobody or nothing, he's been in contact with people that he arrested.
Every single accuser who detectives unearthed were encouraged and led to make false accusations, and both the detectives knew that the information was bad, but they pursued charges anyway.
Well, this is the deal. You got several victims. Okay? And so we're trying to go back on this guy. And he's a pretty bad guy. He's having women do different things.
Oh, thinking they're going to go to jail if they do a favor for him, he wouldn't.
There you go.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
As Kim Davis says,
Does that make sense? I mean, you kind of have to use a little common sense here.
yes, let's have some common sense.
Let's have
Watch as Daniel gives Davis and Gregory his uniform for testing, and think about what they don't want you to notice.
This is key.
What they didn't want to notice, and what they didn't care about. Michelle Melkin narrates.
She testified that Daniel unzipped his pants in an instant and pulled out his penis through the fly of his pants. But Daniel wears tight compression underwear without an opening at the crotch. His bulletproof vest hung below his groin, and his uniform shirt was secured to his socks to keep it taut. The scenario Liggins described is highly unlikely, to put it mildly.
All the accusers say Daniel pretty much just whipped his dick out. Well, he can't have done that. You saw. The effort required for Daniel to pull out his penis in public would have required undoing a lot of gear and pulling his whole pants down.
All right, so let's talk to cops who have dicks. Matt, your thoughts on that?
I mean, I know a lot of cops wear like compression gear just because it's cooler, so and it does make it a little bit hard when you have to go to the bathroom. So I'll just leave it at that.
It's funny 'cause that was actually one of my notes from the previous episodes. I kind of disagree with Matt a little bit on that. I don't wear shirts today, so I tried them once. I thought I was being hung by my shirt. You kind of find a way to urinate without taking your belt off. You slow down, you take your time and stuff, because as Maddie mentioned, you have a lot of gear. You have usually on my duty belt, I have 4 keepers. Then you have your belt itself. Then you have your inner belt. So you try and just use the fly of your pants. And we have button flies on our uniforms, which makes it even worse. So I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a hard likability he could have done it or not. There would still be DNA, especially if he was pulling his penis out for her to give him oral. Her DNA would be on the uniforms, at least the zipper. You would think there'd be some skin transfer on the zipper in that area and stuff. So,
Yeah, I think that was just a really important thing to. So let's play like another minute or two, and then we'll get back to everything.
He can't have done it. Every single accuser talked as if Daniel just unzipped his fly and his dick appeared. They described it that way because, well, it never happened. Now we have to find out. We have to find out why they charged an officer with crimes that they had to have known he didn't commit. Stay tuned for the next video, and in the meantime, go watch Malkin's 2-part series while you wait.
There you go. I mean, that's interesting. Interesting. So let's kind of focus to Janine Liggins, Katie, shall we?
Sure.
So this is Janine Liggins. She was kind of like, is it safe to say she was the poster child of this from the victim side of things?
Sure. Yeah, they used her as the poster child because they could do the grandma narrative. But they didn't, even though she was the poster child, the victim profile was not generated based on her. It was generated based on Terry Morris. So it would be 2 different victim profiles.
Kate, was she the one that claimed she was pinned to the fence by Daniel and could feel his erection through his uniform?
No, I think that was Kayla Lyles.
Are you able to identify
Okay.
her in this? Kayla's the one in the bottom left.
Yes.
Okay, that was another note I took. Believe it or not, I did my homework, took notes last week. And
He really did. I was really impressed by him. He really
You know,
impressed me.
Harry, we were talking about Demetria Campbell, who I had forgotten. She filed her own civil suit separate from the actual group that is part of a civil suit coming up here in the next few months.
Mm-hmm.
But she also alleged that as he was taking her into custody, he grinded against her. And he said that he did use the wall to assist him in getting her into custody because she wasn't excited about it, and she's a pretty big girl.
Right,
So-
that was, I'm sorry, that's what I wanted to address, actually. Using your body to pin someone against a wall or solid object when they're kind of passively, actively resisting is not uncommon. And Matt can definitely speak towards that. I mean, you might have your hand on your radio. You don't want to throw them on the ground, but you're trying not to have them turn around so they're facing you where they can spit on you, strike you, or whatever.
Yeah.
So using your body to pin someone against the wall is not unrealistic. And
Yeah.
if you look at his duty belt in that picture, what she felt likely could be his magazines, it could have been his radio, it could have been his gun, it could have been his baton. To feel an erection through his compression shorts, through his uniform, through the flap from his body armor is I find that highly unlikely.
Mhm.
I think what she felt was probably something more on his duty belt. And I'm not trying to be crude here, unless this guy's hung down to his knee or something.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's the case. Not to be crude either, but she also didn't report that when it happened. She waited until all of this came out on the news.
Mm-hmm.
So how many of these accusers jumped in after the news?
Let's see, pretty much all of them except, so Janie Liggins obviously came forward. Let's see. Well, Terry Morris had already had reported in the 911 call, which I still believe was an excited utterance to get out of trouble. I don't know most of them. I'm going to say most of them because I'm looking at these. I can't think of another one that. Trying to think of who came in first.
You know, that's the disturbing part about it is the media. It was a payday. It seems
Yeah.
like, in my opinion, I'm gonna be in my opinion, it feels like this was a big payday. This was a lottery
Yeah,
ticket.
and they're saying that they didn't know each other, with the exception that Florine Mathis said that she was the housekeeper of Tabitha Barnes, which makes no sense at all. So they knew each other, and maybe they knew they were going to get connected to knowing each other, so they went ahead and gave that up. But when you plot all of these addresses on a map, where, you know, any address that is associated with an accuser, whether it's where they lived, where they dropped someone off, where the assault occurred, these are all in a neighborhood together. It's odd to me that, and a lot of these people, their mode of transportation is walking. It's just, and they hang out at some of the same places to drink.
Right.
Like,
That was
so it's, you know, it's unbelievable that they don't know each other and that they didn't say, hey, I'm doing this, you should do it too. Because it wasn't just this group of people. You know, there were like 40 women who tried to come forward and cash in, but because the police didn't have AVL records that they could use to manufacture a case, they got rid of those women right away.
Can I play devil's
That's one of the things
advocate
I was
here
talking to
for?
Sanch about last week also. Just real quick, Maddie, I'm sorry, buddy. Was the fact this is a very small community. It's not a huge profession in that area. And also it'd be interesting to cross-reference their arrest and see who was in custody at the same time as each other to talk. I'm sorry?
I didn't think about that. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see who was in custody at the same time as each other and had jailhouse talk or get to know each other, stuff like that. But it's a small community. I mean, you're talking about his patrol area, and I'm just guessing what his patrol area was. It might be 25 square miles and 25 complete square miles in that one area. So the likelihood of these ladies not having the same stroll, not being in the same neighborhood, not crossing paths, not having the same clientele, it's unlikely, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm sorry, Maddie, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to, I mean, because I know that like like I said, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. So,
sure.
Don't a lot of like serial killers, as well as, a lot of crimes anyway, they will pick a certain area. You know, it's usually not going to be where they live generally, but they'll pick a certain area and they'll operate in that very specific area most of the time. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see a video later where the detectives are being interviewed and they talk about that very subject, Matt.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do you want to jump into that video now, the Daniel Holtzclaw Factoid 5? You want me to jump into that now?
If you want to do them out of order and you can keep that straight, knock yourself out.
I will.
That's pretty confusing already.
We've been jumping on the investigators, so I kind of want to keep jumping
Yeah,
on them real quick.
do it.
You know, I kind of want to continue it because we haven't really addressed these two people at all during this series. So let's look at the perfect victim narrative and kind of break it down after.
Like I say, it was in the...
It was just demographics of where he worked on how it turned out to be mostly black women.
Do you think he was racist?
No.
No.
And so you think he targeted black women because they just happened to be in the area that he worked?
I think if he worked the South Side, he would have targeted Hispanic women. If he would have worked in our Asian community, he would have targeted Asian women. I think it's just where he worked.
A lot of the public perceives this case, though, through a racial lens. And, in terms of the social climate around the trial, This is what attracted the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of the groups that showed up at trial, because they saw it through a very specific, narrowly racially defined lens. This was a quote-unquote white cop who targeted black women. But you're saying that if he had worked in the Hispanic area or the white area, that he would have...
That's what I think.
And
This is
what-
popular right now.
Yeah.
The black versus white thing is popular right now.
Mhm.
So, and people grab hold of that, of the popular thing.
Like a Gucci
And 2
bag.
years, something else is going to be popular.
Oh.
I mean, that's the one thing she said that I agree with her on. I mean, that they make a racial overtone out of it. And what I find kind of weird, if this guy is a serial rapist, yes, he's going to fish in his own pond where he has access to. But you think there'd be a pattern of that over his college years, over his high school years, over his football years, over his growing up. I mean, I don't think this guy woke up one Saturday morning going, "I'm going to be a rapist of hookers in the where I patrol."
Well, Kim Davis thinks that something flipped in his brain. She talks about, he wanted to be a NFL player and he got rejected. And then, her philosophy is that because of that and other things, that something flipped in his brain and turned him into this.
But there would usually still be. I'm sorry, Maddie. There would still be usually one or two. And I say I'm speculating here. I'm not saying I don't know Daniel, but there'd be some allegations of a date rape or a assault during a date or something. You would think. I don't think even with that switch like that, you go from 0 to 100 in an hour. It just doesn't seem to fit the norm. Like I said, whatever the norm might be in a situation like this.
Yeah, they tried really hard to find one person that would say anything, and they got nothing. They got that he's really kind and respectful, and he's really loving and gentle, those kind of things.
Right.
So
Maddie,
going
before I cut you
along,
off, buddy.
yeah, going along with what Harry was saying, typically, especially again going back to the example of serial killers, but also you can be the same for serial rapists. There's typically going to be some warning signs or some sort of indicator of behavior that's going to, like Harry said, you don't just wake up one day and decide that you're going to murder somebody, or a specific, be a serial murderer. You've got to. There's some stuff that happens typically now. Now, if, like, for example, the NFL thing or whatever, if that had anything to do with it, maybe. But the thing is, you would have seen little instances of smaller offenses occurring before this whole thing started happening, where he's alleged to have raped these hookers and everything. So,
In an experimental phase, I mean, like I said, it might be an inappropriate touch to a suspect. It might be, like I said, a date rape accusation. It might be an aggressive date accusation. It's just, it is bizarre. Matt and I both agree. I don't think you go from 0 to 100 overnight. And how long was he an officer for?
3 years.
3 years. So yeah, so it wasn't like his NFL career failed on Tuesday and Wednesday he's a rapist now.
And he was working really hard at making a career out of this, and he got an early gang unit assignment, which that doesn't usually happen with new officers like that. He had already been issued one of the new police cars, which there weren't very many of them. So they knew that he was a hard worker, and that he was working toward moving up.
Yeah, that's why I was curious of what his personnel file looked like from his superiors, because that also, especially over a 3-year time period, that kind of paints a generality of a picture of what kind of officer he was. And one of the first things they teach you is if you're not getting complaints, and I'm not trying to say you want to go out and get complaints, but if you're not getting complaints, you're not necessarily doing your job. People don't like being arrested. They don't come and say thank you for arresting me usually.
Yeah.
So it's not unusual to have complaints, and then alone self-reporting your complaints, which kind of goes to show his character.
Right. Yeah, I think he probably should have done that less to be liked more, but that wasn't who he was. I mean, he broke rules, but not like
All right,
that.
Katie. I have a little confliction.
Okay.
I want to continually go in on Kim Davis right now,
Okay, do what you want.
but I wanted to go over the Terry Morris thing as well. So let's kind of. I sent you a video that I don't know if you saw before, but the 15 things video.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't watch it. I'm sorry.
Well, let's watch it, shall we?
Okay, let's do it.
So we're gonna break it down as well. So anyone want to say pause? I'll pause it, and you guys can just jump in. So let's kind of like do like I do the breakdowns with the body cams. So anyone wants to jump in and say pause, please do, because it might help me from getting the copyright strike and all that stuff, just in case there's any like major media stuff I'm playing. Just saying, guys. All right, so let's go.
That he did this. But before you started the interview, did you have a sense that he did the things that Janie Liggins accused him of doing?
Before we started the interview, I felt like that what Janie told me was the truth. Yes.
I assume it's because of all the other.
Hey, pause for
women
1 second there, Sandra, please.
Oh shit!
that he became a part of
Wait
this
for 2
case.
seconds.
I mean, absolutely.
I like the wait for 2 seconds.
He wasn't prepared for that.
Exactly. So wasn't she the first one they brought in who was high as a kite?
I'm sorry. Which one was it? I went to get a drink of water.
I'm sorry.
Me too.
The Jamie Lee Liggins. Wasn't she the one that was like strung out during the first interview and like scratching herself? And
No, that was Terry Morris, and she was the one who had reported in the 911 call. She's the reason that they already had Daniel on their radar, because even though she said that her assault happened for sure on May 20th or 21st, Daniel had stopped her on May 8th. So after Janie Liggins reports on the 18th of June, then they decide to start really working that Terry Morris case again.
Okay.
Absolutely. When you have one victim, I believed her.
The fingerprint tests came back negative on the car, and the same test came back negative for DNA in her mouth.
Correct.
You still believed her story at that point.
I did.
So confirmation bias is the brain's tendency to, once you start to kind of get a sense of what someone is like, so in an initial interaction, you start to feel like this is a funny person, or this is a smart person, or this is someone I can trust. And once you start to have that initial hunch, your brain naturally looks for information that confirms that initial hunch and kind of ignores everything else.
After Janie was investigated, there was DNA on his pants that was female DNA that was unknown. It didn't match to Janie. We knew that he just didn't decide, I think I'm going to pull this lady over and sexually assault her. There had to be something that built up to it, or there had to be other victims out there.
Ignores everything else.
For the next 6 months, they hunted for victims. African-American women who'd been run through the police database by Officer Holtzclaw.
Your brain naturally looks for information that confirms that initial hunch.
He wasn't stupid in the way that he committed these crimes. He took them places where he knew there wouldn't be witnesses.
The reason they were victims is because Daniel Holtzclaw profiled them and picked them on purpose, with the exception of Janie Liggins that he made his final mistake on and the reason he got caught.
You should never assume, because when you assume, you make an ass of you and me.
The detectives, they kind of led him into basically give him a lottery ticket. And so the investigation as far as approaching these women and saying, we have a tip that you've been sexually assaulted by an Oklahoma City police officer, you're opening the floodgates, you're opening the door. All they had to do was say yes.
Correct! Ding!
Well, they had it in for me. It just is like everything else he's tried to say in this case. It makes absolutely no sense. And the reason it makes no sense is because he is a liar and he is a serial rapist.
And the reason it makes no sense is because he is a liar and he is a serial rapist.
Are you kidding me?
In Daniel's mind, he
You want to pause that?
Yep.
He is above these people.
I was quick too.
When in fact, the liar is ADA Galen Gigger right there, who lied about the DNA in his closing statement. So he's the liar. Go ahead.
Awesome. Well, let's go.
These people are beneath him, and he didn't do anything wrong. And I feel like if Daniel wasn't guilty, and he wanted people to know he wasn't guilty, he had every opportunity to get on the stand and explain his story.
You should never assume.
Was there a reason why you didn't take his cell phone?
His cell phone?
Yes.
All right, Katie, I don't want to be rude.
Yep.
The blinking, is that a medical condition?
No, she does that when she's lying.
Okay, that's what I was alluding to.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't know if she had something going on, like medically, which caused her to do that. But that's definitely a very lying tendency, in my opinion.
She's a chronic liar. Yeah, that's her condition.
I mean, Matt, does that look? I mean, the blinking and stuff. Does that kind of raise a little red flag to you if you see that?
I mean, Harry could probably speak more to this because he's had more years of experience than I have. But yes, there are certain body language and different things that we do when we lie that can be an indication that we're lying. It's not always 100% true, but at the same time, it can indicate that there's some deception going on. Harry, you want to elaborate more on that?
Yeah. You're looking for physiological responses. Are they making eye contact? Are they making constant eye contact? Are they looking off to the left or right too much to try and get their story together in their own brain? I'm even watching her interview. She's looking to the left for confirmation from her partner that, am I saying the right thing, it seems. I mean, it just seems like she's looking for affirmation that, like a treat. Am I going the right direction? Am I going the right direction? I mean, what's this guy to her left have to say to her that her story, she knows her story. One of the best lines you ever heard, and I was like, if you're telling the truth, you don't have to think about it. It comes out.
Yeah.
And you don't need affirmation from anybody else for your truth.
Yeah.
Now, does Daniel regret not... I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys.
She does that a lot. Go ahead.
Does Daniel regret not taking the stand?
He does, yes.
I mean, I think that would have been key, especially with his emotions, to give the jury a feel of who this kid was. It's hard. I'm not a lawyer. I've never been to law school. All the law I've learned is from, the job, law, and with people.
Matlock.
But exactly, Matlock. Good stuff like that in the 60s. Perry Mason. Anyway, but it gives the people a chance to see who you are, especially when you are innocent. And I know a lot of attorneys don't like their clients taking the stands. But I almost think in a case like this, it'd be imperative to put your person on the stand.
Yeah, well, his attorney did not want him to take the stand, so he took his attorney's advice. He really trusted in. I mean, this attorney was represented to be one of the top 2 defense attorneys in Oklahoma City. Daniel really thought this guy was going to take care of him.
Wow.
All right, let's keep going and kind of break it down.
I didn't see.
Look at those eyes.
There was no reason to do
Freaking
that.
me out.
What? Take it for what?
To look at who he called or what messages were on there, and
Even just looking at Janie is because we only had Janie interviewed full blown when we did this interview. There was never any allegation or any comment that he got her number, that he called her, that she called him. There was nothing to analyze his phone for.
So you didn't take his phone. What about his underwear?
Didn't take them.
Why not?
Daniel said that he had washed the underwear. He still had on the pants he had on the night previously.
And so you believed him that you believed that?
Stancha, can we stop right there real
But
quick?
you already had a sense that...
I wanted to talk about the DNA thing. So their accusation is, I am not a DNA expert. I know a little bit about skin transfer, stuff like that. And I'm sure Matt's actually probably had more training than I have in this aspect, being on the road and everything. But their accusation is this guy did not take his gear off, that he simply whipped his penis out, and this girl gave him oral sex.
Right.
So she has her face, again, I'm not trying to be crude, her face is grinding up and down on a steel zipper, and you want to say there's no skin transfer whatsoever. She
Right.
might not be scratched by it or whatever, but the fact that there's no physical DNA on his zipper from this rape, I just don't see how physiologically that would be possible.
So if you think that's crazy, then think about that she's not the only one that alleges that in that last shift, when he was wearing those pants, he supposedly raped Adara Gardner, Kayla Lyles, and Jamie Liggins through the zip fly of his pants.
So they're
Not
claiming that
Jamie Liggins, but oral.
right. So they're claiming that he had that's the exact same uniform on.
Yeah.
For 3 rapes.
The pants, not the shirt.
Right.
Not the underwear, the pants.
Right.
And the belt and all his gear, yeah.
Right. So that's their accusation. And Not My Verbiage posted something up there also about their touch DNA on the zipper with 2 others and the male DNA. One of the things I mentioned to Sancho about the touch DNA, especially with the male, most officers have their uniforms dry cleaned. When the dry cleaner hangs up your uniform, they usually button your pants up, pull the zipper up, and hang it on a hanger for you. I'd be curious if they ever tested that DNA, what they had for the male DNA, to what the dry cleaner's DNA was.
What they didn't have a complete profile on the male DNA, so all they could positively say was that it was male DNA because there was a Y chromosome. But they wouldn't have actually been able to either to say positively or rule out that it was Rocky Gregory from putting his hand in the bag, or Daniel, or the guy that he pat searched, or anyone that he had any male that he had pat searched the previous 24 hours, the previous shift. Or, a guy that was with Adara Gardner that he pat searched. So they wouldn't have been able to confirm or rule out that because they couldn't test it.
Fair enough.
All right, let's get back into this. This is going to frustrate everybody listening. I'm going to warn everybody. This is going to frustrate a lot of people.
That he did what Janie Liggins said that he did.
I did.
But you believed him that he had washed his underwear.
I guess believe and hope. Most people change underwear.
Ignores everything else.
So there are plenty of reasons to lie, including
Get out of trouble.
yeah, and money, as you said, was a big factor for people. I mean, they wanted to cash in.
After they saw it on the TV, they were like, "Ooh, I can get in on this."
And this kind of case and these kind of allegations are sort of a magnet for people who are looking to cash in.
Right.
In the 2 hours that Daniel Holtzclaw gave his interrogation about his side of the story versus all of the evolutions that happened in Janie Liggins.
Oh, nothing changed. He admitted to pulling her over. He admitted to putting her in the back. He admitted to everything that Janie said except the sexual assault.
There's no forensic evidence to back up what she said.
Correct.
And you still believe her, not him.
I do.
I assume it's because of all the other women that became a part of this case.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. When you have one victim, I believed her, but we don't always get things done when you have one victim. But when you have 13, and the MO's the same, and the verbiage is the same, it just becomes a little bit more believable.
So there are plenty of reasons to lie, including
Get out of trouble.
yeah, and money, as you said, was a big factor for people.
After I talked to Janie, I was like, something happened to Janie.
So confirmation bias is the brain's tendency to, once you start to kind of go get a sense of what someone is like, so in an initial interaction, you start to feel like this is a funny person, or this is a smart person, or this is someone I can trust. And once you start to have that initial hunch, your brain naturally looks for information that confirms that initial hunch and kind of ignores everything else.
She said, if you picture it, he's got his penis in her mouth and his gun's right there. All she can see is his gun.
And she asked him, "Are you going to kill me?"
What was different about her?
Her demeanor, hysterical at times, bawling at times. She had no motive at all to make this up.
So there are plenty of reasons to lie, including,
Get out of trouble.
yeah, and money, as you said, was a big factor for people. So there are plenty of reasons to lie, including,
Get out of trouble.
yeah, and money.
We don't record victim interviews except involving police officers. Except involving police officers. We never have recorded victim interviews.
Okay, but this one involved a police
It
officer.
did, but I had no recording, I had no equipment to record it. And it didn't even cross my mind to record it. We're in the middle of the hospital.
Is that a common response, HB?
I'm sorry, to what, buddy?
To not recording, to just simply stating we have no way to record, let's just do the interview because it's a chaotic situation?
Yeah, I mean, technology is relied upon too much sometimes. However, her excuse, I don't know how to use my phone, which she mentioned earlier, I find that not believable.
Questionable. Beyond
Yeah. It's like, I mean, it's, even if you, I mean, again, this was what, 6 years ago, I believe it was?
Right.
So even the phones back then had, 3 megapixel cameras on them that you could video them on if you wanted to.
Right.
And yeah, I definitely find it suspect. I mean,
if you're supposed to, you have to interview with police involved, and they didn't, Katie, correct?
No, they didn't, because, it was the middle of the night and she doesn't, even though she's a sex crimes detective on call and knows what on call means, she didn't have the equipment after all these years of being in that position to do her job. So I don't know.
She should have.
well, no, and I'm sorry, man. Regarding that, also, even myself to this day, you have basically a go bag in your car at all times.
Yeah.
You have an extra uniform shirt. You have your pens, your papers, your tablets, or whatever it is. You have this stuff. It's not like spread out through your house. You grab your backpack, or the backpack's in your car already. So again, the fact that she's the on-call duty officer and to say she's not ready to be called out that night.
Yeah, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't track.
It matches all of her other excuses.
Right. And then also about the reports and nothing else. Those reports are almost too identical.
Yeah.
But say she could have at the very least taken her phone and used the audio recording function and recorded the conversation.
She said she doesn't know how to work her phone. I can call and I can text, but that's it. She's been rehired at OCPD in the technical department. So I don't know, man. What she's doing there.
Right.
It's not something we do. We don't take a recorder to the hospital and do interviews.
You don't use your phones for interviews?
No. I wouldn't even know how to record on my phone if I did.
You wouldn't?
No. I have no idea.
What were the results of the SANE test with regard to Jamie Liggins?
There was no DNA in her mouth. But she said that he did not ejaculate. We can get skin cells. We can get pre-ejaculate. You can do all that and still get DNA.
She also said at one point her hands were on the hood?
On the hood, yes.
And what were the results of that?
They didn't get fingerprints.
Why do you think that is?
Because hundreds of people touched the cars, the weather, you got to keep in mind, Holtzclaw's car was a pigsty. It was absolutely nasty. And a lot of times, like when we go into a house for a burglary, and it's just nasty, you never get results from that.
The fingerprint tests came back negative on the car, and the SANE test came back negative for DNA in her mouth.
Correct.
You still believed her story at that point?
I did.
Hey, moron. Fucking moron. Hey, moron. You fucking idiot.
I did.
both investigated officers in
That
the
was
past,
cool.
but so it's a different dynamic. They kind of know a lot of the tricks of the trade that we do. They've watched plenty of our interviews when they bring other suspects down that they've arrested.
But before you started the interview, did you have a sense that he did the things that Janie Liggins accused him of doing?
Before we started the interview, I felt like that what Janie told me was the truth. Yes.
Confirmation bias is...
What are some of the adjectives that you'd use to describe Daniel Holtzclaw?
Narcissist.
Psychopath.
Evil.
Is it possible that there's an innocuous and completely non-nefarious reason that the 17-year-old's DNA was on his pants?
On the inside of his pants? No.
He couldn't have gone to the bathroom, put his hands down there.
No.
Were the pockets of the pants tested?
No.
Why not?
Why?
But Dr.
All right, thoughts on that?
Oh my God.
Jump in. Someone jump in. That's
Come
huge.
on. Go ahead.
It's just disturbing. I'm getting echo from somebody.
Uh-oh. Who's that going?
Okay, can you guys hear me?
I think it's you echoing. Hold on, let me shift everybody around. All right, mic check. All right, it's not me. Matt? It's Matt. Hold on one second, Matt. Are you there?
I'm here.
No echo. Are you there?
I'm here.
No
Matt,
echo?
you? No, I'm no echo.
Yeah, it's Matt.
Damn you, Matthew.
Matt, hop off and hop back on. I'm gonna throw it in the chat. I'll throw it in the chat, my guy. All right, go ahead.
So did we lose Kate also?
Nope, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Where do they get the fact that he's supposedly a narcissist from? I find that kind of bizarre. Nothing in his jacket indicates his any type of narcissist personality, overpowering personality. Why would you not check all common areas of his pants? Front pockets, back pockets, belt, buttons, zippers, everything.
Well, because as you'll see when you know, as this goes on, that all throughout this case, they didn't do anything that would be exculpatory. You know, go back to the underwear.
Right.
Where are you wearing the same underwear? No. Where are they? In the wash. Okay.
Right.
They don't even ask, have they already been washed?
Right.
And he's a serial rapist who assaulted 3 women the day before, so he probably assaulted at least one the few days before that. Go get all of his clothes. They didn't do anything.
Matt, can you turn off the YouTube? That probably is why there's an echo, because you have the YouTube playing on your phone in this.
So they want you to believe he's worn the same uniform pants for 3 days, and then instantly he ran home and washed that one pair of underwear in one day.
Well, actually 2 days.
Okay, 2 days.
Yeah,
Okay, fair
he
enough.
wore him the shift before when he supposedly came into contact, or when he supposedly assaulted Adara Gardner, Sheila Lyles, and Janie Liggins. And then he goes home, sleeps, he changes everything, wears his same pants from yesterday.
Right. I mean, me personally, I only do my laundry on my days off. I don't do it in between, just because I come home from work. The last thing I want to do is start doing laundry all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm. Well, they weren't washed, so.
Right. So I mean, I'm just curious. Also, since we're kind of on this, what was his original ground of appeals? Was it like ineffective counsel or something?
That was one of them. That we are gonna touch on that tonight. We have a video that covers that. So.
Okay, cool.
All right, so this is only a few minutes more, then we'll jump into the appeal process. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Yeah, works for me.
Dr. Crane suggests common sense would mean actually testing another spot as a control.
Is it possible that the transfer of DNA cells from the 17-year-old to Daniel Holtzclaw came from random transfer or touch transfer?
I have not worked one sexual assault case and had transfer DNA.
Is it
It's-
possible?
Anything's possible. I would never say it's not possible.
Do you think it should be standard protocol to test, other areas to rule out that possibility?
Well, if we would have tested the knee of his pants, I can't say that came from a sexual assault. It's not. Does that make sense? I mean, you kind of have to use a little common sense here.
Shut your fucking mouth! Shut the fuck up, you cunt!
But Dr. Crane suggests common sense would mean actually testing another spot as a control.
What was the pattern of behavior when he would stop a woman, a potential victim?
He would check their background first, and if it was convictions, drug use, prostitution, then he would target them. He would say, well, I need to search you. I need to make sure you don't have, and it would kind of start from there. They are the perfect victim. Nobody's going to believe them. If you believe them, who cares? They're prostitutes. A prostitute can't be raped. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. So that's why he was picking these kind of women, because that's the perfect victim.
You should never assume.
She couldn't identify Holtzclaw in a photo lineup.
Right. They don't look at their face.
Does this trouble you at all that the descriptions are so far off?
No.
Why do you think all the other women stayed silent?
Because of their lifestyle and their relationship with the police department.
How did she describe the attacker?
She said that he was big, muscle, bodybuilder big. She thought he had blonde hair. Once he started doing the things he was doing, she was afraid to look at his face, and she was afraid to look at his name tag, because she thought if he saw her doing that he would kill her.
Could it be that you reverse engineered the investigations and put the power of suggestion into some of these potential victims' heads?
You could do that. I mean, I guess, but I didn't.
But before you started the interview, did you have a sense that he did the things that Janie Liggins accused him of doing?
Before we started the interview, I felt like that what Janie told me was the truth, yes.
I assume it's because of all the other women that became a part of this case.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. When you have one victim, I believed her.
The fingerprint tests came back negative on the car, and the same test came back negative for DNA in her mouth.
Correct.
You still believed her story at that point?
I did.
When you got that DNA match, what went through your head?
Well, I said I was going to do a backflip off my file cabinet, but I didn't. I was just ecstatic, because that was the DNA moment.
How difficult is it to mount a case where you have witnesses showing up high on PCP, you have witnesses with a history of lying to the police? These are not easy witnesses to put on the stand.
No, it was horrible, and plus it gives the defense just a million things to attack.
Confirmation bias is
Day by day, day by day. I feel like
That he got her number. That he got her number. They didn't get fingerprints. They didn't get fingerprints. Did.
All right, so I want to touch on the DNA thing because I really think that's a really big focal point, Katie.
Yeah.
I want to queue up a video you sent me on the DNA aspect, and then we will have HB jump in after that, and we'll go on from there. Forensic Science Speaks Out. That's the one you're referring to, correct?
Yeah, we can do that one right now. At some point, I want to get into Erica's videos where she's, talking specifically about, she's the biologist who discovered that there was male DNA in the sample because Elaine Taylor, she misrepresented that at trial and didn't, said there wasn't a Y chromosome.
So you want to touch on that now?
Which, we can do this. The Brent Turvey section in this video starts at 1721.
All right, I'm almost there. I'm at 1703.
While you're queuing that up, that's one of the things I want to mention, and just Rhonda mentioned it also. So they're stripping this guy of the suspected outfit that he's worn during multiple assaults over a 24-hour period.
Uh-huh.
So why would you not have him stand on a piece of huge butcher block paper or something as he disrobes for any touch DNA, any evidence whatsoever falling off his uniform.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Rocky Gregory knows how to pull up evidence.
And Maddie, you're echoing again, buddy. I am not an expert on evidence collection by any means. This is basic stuff you're taught, though, on
Come on,
how to
boy.
handle evidence to not contaminate and cross-contaminate it. You're in a small room that is used multiple times for multiple suspects, and they're doing nothing to preserve anything of this guy's DNA. So, or evidence on the uniform. And the way he handles it, he just picks it up off the floor, throws it in a bag. He's got no gloves on whatsoever. You have no idea what's dropped off the uniform, what's dropped on the floor. It's, you know, there's like a million, again, I'm not a legal scholar by any means, but it's like, from a layperson standpoint, as I think you and a lot of your friends have done, Katie, it's easy to pick these little things apart.
Right. So I don't want to overwhelm Katie too much.
Yep.
I'm gonna go to DNA. All right.
No, this is, we'll roll into appeal after DNA. It flows, I think, all right that way, but whatever you want.
Yeah. Let's go to the DNA with Erica Faust and kind of, you know, this is the only way I can do it because it was a Google Drive thing. So let me blow it up.
The OCPD DNA lab has a troubled history because one of the worst forensic analysts in the world worked there, Joyce Gilchrist, and led to many people being wrongfully convicted, even ending up on death row. My concern is that if we don't pay attention to history, we will repeat what has happened, and I think that has occurred in Daniel Holtzclaw's case, because once again we've seen some members of the government wanting to pretend that there were no errors and not allow the public to understand that a forensic analyst was incorrect. I would hope that the Attorney General and the district attorneys would look back at what happened with Joyce Gilchrist and realize more important than getting convictions is making sure that forensic science is presenting the truth, as much of it as you can know. And then that would really help in cases to make sure that defendants get fair trials. In Daniel's case, the errors were substantial enough that the 6 internationally renowned forensic scientists who went public with their report concluded that Daniel did not receive a fair trial and his convictions should be overturned so that he can have a new trial free from forensic science errors. And I agree with their conclusion wholeheartedly.
All right. Thoughts?
It's just, I mean, it's amazing. You know, and I know Kate and you talked about this before the show. Catherine Zellner, there's a couple other good organizations I sent Sancho a couple weeks ago. I know she's busy. And for those who don't know who Catherine Zellner is, she's the one who is working on the case. I forgot the guy's name. I just drawn a blank now.
Stephen Avery?
Yes, the Stephen Avery case. She thrives on cases like this, and I'm kind of getting ahead before the end, I guess, but I think it's imperable that it just, you guys need to stay on top of her and try and get someone of that caliber to pursue this case to get this kid justice of some sort. And if he's found guilty again, fine, he's found guilty again, you know, but just what is being picked apart from some YouTubers like us on our sofas on a Monday night, it's like there's enough there that if I was on a person on this jury, I could not, based on what I've seen here, I'm sure there's tons of other evidence we have not seen by all means, but there's enough doubt brought by this 4-part series that I'd be like, I can't find this kid guilty based on what you presented to me. And it is very disturbing. And I see Rhonda's responding that, you know, you guys are pushing for that, and she's ideal for this type of case. And I've seen several interviews with her and Stephen Avery, and she's a pit bull. And if, you know, by some God blessing that she happens to see Sancho's 4-part series, I think it'd be phenomenal if she was involved in this.
Well, she actually has been involved with this case with the civil aspect, so she's familiar with the case. She, believes in Daniel's innocence, but unless something lightens her load with the cases she's dealing with right now, it's just she feels like not to speak for her, but this case, to do it correctly, is like taking on 13 cases.
Right, especially with the Stephen Avery case still going on also. And I know he's got a appeals, he's waiting for an appeals ruling from what I understand right now. And I understand. I mean, these cases aren't simple. The Avery case is a great example. I mean, that's been going on for 15 years now, 20 years almost.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned on the last episode, Daniel knows he's going to be in for a while waiting for this.
Yeah.
There's another organization down in Georgia. They recently made a movie about this guy's organization, and I'll get it back to Sancho again.
Okay.
Maybe reach out to them because they go after cases like this also. And it's just, it is disturbing. I mean, especially when you have someone coming forward saying the evidence is tainted, give them a new trial based on the tainted evidence alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
No Oklahoma judge is going to do that.
Matt, you good?
Matt, is echoing again?
Yeah, echo again. Are you listening to the stream?
I have headphones, so.
You might want to dump the headphones.
Yeah, it might be the headphones. All right, let me mute you for a little bit. Katie, do you want me to play the part 2 part of this, or is there something else in here?
Man, I know it's a lot of clips, but they're all really excellent. I mean, she was the guest that we wanted to have on for the last few weeks. So if you don't mind playing all of her clips, I was just glued to them last night. It was the first time I'd seen them.
There were several articles that show that Mr. Giger's belief that DNA transfer does not happen, that belief is incorrect and does not match science. There's a study by Sarah Jones and Kirsty Scott that came out in 2010 in the journal Science and Justice. And this study discovered that a woman's non-intimate skin cell DNA from her face and hands could transfer to a man's hands when he touched them briefly, and then to the underwear of the man, and even all the way to his genitals. So that proves that Mr. Giger's statement is incorrect when he was claiming that this explanation of innocent DNA transfer via Daniel's hands is impossible. A second study by Helmus and others, which was published online October 27 of 2015, which is just before the trial, found that you could actually have skin cell DNA transfer from a person's neck, rubbed for 5 seconds with a piece of cloth, and then the cloth was handed to a second person. It then got under the person's hands, and then that second person touched a second piece of cloth, and that second piece of cloth then found the initial person's, from the neck, DNA on that second piece of cloth. So this is called tertiary transfer, and that could match what happened in Daniel's case, where he was said to have touched possessions, a bag belonging to this teenaged accuser, and then would have had to urinate during his 10-hour shift, I believe it was. And in fact, I think he's probably often having to go to the restroom, and police officers don't necessarily stop at a store to use the restroom. They may have to go by the side of the road when you're not even having, when you have to stop people quickly and go on chases. You're not going to necessarily have time to go to a restroom. So he would have to unzip the fly of his pants and urinate very quickly right there, which would give ample opportunity for his hands to touch the fly of his pants while urinating. A third study is by Kale and others, and that was published online September 2015, also before the trial. And this study found that if you shake hands with a second individual and then touch a knife, and then swab the knife to see the DNA that you find, you can actually find DNA belonging to the person whose hands you shook, but not your own hands when you handle the knife. So as an analogy to what could have happened in Daniel's case, on the fly of his pants, he could have transferred DNA from another person with whom he came in contact, but on the fly of his pants, he may not have left sufficient quantities of his own DNA for it to be identified during testing.
So, can you pause there for a second, buddy?
It paused itself. Go ahead, my
Cool.
guy.
This came to me as listening to this lady. And Matt, if your phones are off, I mean, you definitely chime in how you were trained. When you're doing a pat down on somebody, we were always taught that you basically put the inside of your leg on the inside of their outer leg to control their body. That way they can't spin around on you.
Yeah, you told me that, yeah.
Yeah, and you're physically touching that person basically with your outer side of your calf all the way down, your outer side of your leg. So there'd be some type of touch DNA, you would think, or some transfer, whether it be from her clothes or whatever, to his uniform on both of his legs as well. How do you guys do your pat downs, Matt?
By the way, can y'all hear me better? Is there no echo?
Yeah, there's no echo now.
All right. I mean, the way I wasn't taught, or at least I wasn't taught that specifically. I could see how, you could use that very easily if somebody was trying to, get squirrely with you, how you can control them easier. So I could see that. But I could totally, the way I just pat somebody down is usually I'll have them stand in front of the patrol car and, separate their feet. And so that way I can get everything on video and I'll use the outside of my hand, especially if it's a woman.
Right.
And that kind of thing. But I could see how, if that method is used, that you could get that transfer DNA.
Right. And also when you're doing, like when you ask them to spread their feet, and you try to avoid the term spread your legs because it's very sexist and it's very controversial, but when they don't spread their feet far enough, do you not use your boot to kind of like boot them along a little bit and like go a little bit wider for me, please?
Yes.
So there'd be some sort of DNA transfer there because now you're physically kicking this person lightly, however it is. Again, you have touch DNA being transferred, whether it be cotton DNA, clothing DNA, whatever it is. I mean, I'm just getting back to not searching or DNA testing all of his pants completely.
Right. Once again, that might have been exculpatory, I think.
Right.
So,
Okay.
I mean, that doesn't really make sense that you're seriously only going to test the inside and outside of the fly.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't make sense to me, and I'm not a crime lab analyst, but
There'd be some type of DNA all over your pants from all day long. Even when you get done taking your gloves off, if you have your own sweat on your DNA from wiping your hands off and drying your hands off.
that'd create a lot of work for them if they found all that kind of different DNA, and it would not fit with their narrative. And since he was already guilty before he was interviewed, then it would be a problem. Be kind of careful.
Okay, cool.
All right, let's jump into the next part. Matt, jump in. Feel free after this, okay?
On February 5th, 2016,
Matt's mic sounds better than mine right now.
After Daniel's conviction, Prosecutor Giger talked with Ariel Reshef of Coco 5 News, and he said a statement that I'd like to break down to address all the factual errors in it and also point out what is true. The overall issue here is that Prosecutor Giger has misrepresented the DNA evidence in Daniel's case, and I'm concerned that a prosecutor who has done that is also the one who, in recent secret hearings, has been questioning the people at the hearings about Elaine Taylor's personnel records. I don't believe that someone who has misrepresented the DNA evidence, not only in the trial and to the public, is able to understand the evidence enough to realize whether there are errors in it or not, because his statements to me are internally inconsistent and irrational. So to the public on February 5th, 2016, in a TV news report, he said this.
The DNA evidence were skin cells. The skin cells were transferred through the body fluids of a 17-year-old girl after he raped her. That's what the evidence was. That's what the jury heard. And certainly that's what they convicted him of.
Some people say they're skin cells. They could have been from anywhere.
They tried to explain DNA from a 17-year-old girl that ends up inside his pants. at the areas where his privates are. Quite frankly, their explanation was not believable because you can't explain that.
So those are Mr. Giger's understandings of the evidence and the trial. And the part that he is correct about is that the jury did hear that the evidence was that there was vaginal fluid, because that's what Mr. Giger told them in the closing argument when he misrepresented the evidence. We've already heard the statement that Elaine Taylor made during the trial, which was that scientifically she cannot tell how the DNA transferred to the fly of the pants. So Mr. Giger should have known the evidence does not allow him to make the statement to the public that there's vaginal fluid. And I would like to ask him what made him make that statement when it's not consistent with the evidence his own DNA analyst presented. He also said that the jury convicted Daniel because of this evidence that there supposedly was vaginal fluid. And that part I would agree with Mr. Giger, because DNA evidence and forensic evidence in a jury trial is so important to jurors that any kind of misrepresentation of it will have a high impact on their decisions for the verdict. And there have been studies that have looked at this issue. There's a report by 6 internationally known scientists that was published because of their concerns about how scientific issues and flaws in the science, in Daniel's case, impacted the verdict. And they did research, reported on research that shows that jurors often overvalue the weight of DNA evidence, even when it lacks probative value, meaning the weight of the evidence, how important it is to deciding whether a crime occurred. And this is especially true in circumstantial cases, which would be cases where you don't have, say, a video of the crime happening. You just have little bits of evidence that don't directly prove there was a crime. And any kind of misrepresentation of DNA evidence is going to make the jurors feel that a crime occurred, especially when they're told something like there's vaginal fluid when there wasn't. Back to the statement that Prosecutor Giger made, he said the cells were transferred through the body fluids of a 17-year-old girl. That is false. Like we talked about, there was no evidence of body fluid, so you can't say definitively that there was body fluid there. If you don't test for something, you can't say that it's there. But they didn't see anything that suggested vaginal fluid, no white stains, nothing that would make them think it was there. So it was completely speculation on his part that vaginal fluid was present. Another part of his statement, which I take exception to, and the 6 internationally known scientists, they all felt that the evidence showed there was a valid non-sexual explanation for the DNA found on the fly of Daniel's pants. And that explanation is non-intimate DNA transfer. So this is the sort of transfer that Mr. Giger is telling the public is simply not possible. He said it's not a reasonable argument to claim that DNA could transfer from a teenager to her purse, for example, to Daniel's hands and to the fly of the pants. But these 6 internationally renowned scientists have looked at the evidence, and they know about the studies that show that DNA transfers very readily from our hands to objects we can touch. But it's not always consistently transferring. So sometimes you may touch an object and you don't leave DNA, but sometimes you may.
Matt, jump in. What's your thoughts on that? And then Katie.
Well, I mean, she's absolutely right. I think that, and the prosecutors, they're lawyers, so they play games. You know, their job is to prosecute a case and get a conviction. So I don't fault him for trying to do his job, but at the same time, you know, he is stretching basically the evidence that is there to fit a narrative, which, like she described, that it was vaginal fluid on the fly of his pants, even though the experts said they couldn't say one way or the other. That's what it was that was on his pants. So, I mean, it's just kind of an interesting, you know, it's all the theatrics of the courtroom a little bit, you know, that prosecutors and defense attorneys alike play. that kind of helps, get convictions or get somebody off,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't fault him for wanting to win either, but because he chooses to operate in that manner with lies when you're talking about destroying not only Daniel's life, but his whole family's lives have been destroyed by this. I think at the very least the immunity needs to go away because that is far too common that these prosecutors do shit like that knowing that they have immunity, and it pisses me off.
Oh no, I agree. I mean, it's totally immoral and unethical, and that's why also prosecutors they have discretion on when a case comes before them. They can drop the charges. I mean, if they don't think the evidence is good enough. So
Right.
I mean, now, like I said, it's so like I said, in one sense, because it's his job as a prosecutor, I don't fault him. Because I think also the detectives had a role in playing, misleading a little bit as well too. So I mean, I don't fault the prosecutor.
And I
solely.
agree with you in that sense because we need to take their immunity away as well because, you're just to talk about your point there a little bit. Rocky Gregory, when he wrote the probable cause application or whatever you call it, he said that Jamie Liggins had a SANE kit done. So he just leaves it I think it was for the arrest warrant, but I'm sure he parroted that in the probable cause. But so he just completely leaves it at that. And I guess the judge just assumes that he wouldn't mention there was a SANE test done if it came back negative. But he didn't tell them that it came back negative. He didn't mention that nothing in her story matched and everything in Daniel, no handprints, fingerprints on the car. They knew that stuff already. He left it out.
Well, so the reason he did that is because when you're the probable cause that's a section of a warrant, whether it's a search warrant or an arrest warrant. So the probable cause section is basically what probable cause do you have that a crime has been committed, basically, that a judge is going to look at. And so you present all the evidence that you have, to the judge and say, Judge, this is why I think a crime happened. The judge evaluates and the judge will either kick the warrant back or they will sign the warrant for arrest. So, or search, depends on what kind of warrant it is.
One of the things I'd find interesting, and it'd be extremely labor intensive though, is to do a FOIA request of all emails from the beginning of this case to the end for the sheriff's department, the police department, and the DA's office. And I'm saying all emails, that way it's not limited to just what they mentioned by Daniel's name, to find out what the narrative was from the higher ups of what they wanted done with this case.
Yeah, I mean, we did get all of the Lane Taylor's. Well, we tried to get all of the Lane Taylor's emails, but they deleted them right after she quit. And then they said that, that's just policy and it was ridiculous to ask for him, basically. And that, how could they have known that Daniel's team was going to want that stuff? But then, after a few motions were filed, miraculously, they found some of them. So
and that's what's disturbing.
The shenanigans are just abundant.
Yeah, and I mean, there has to be a narrative behind the scenes from the actual district attorney, from the police chief, of how to push the narrative of this case to get a guilty conviction. And like we were talking about before, this was right during the Ferguson situation. Now they could not let off a white officer in what's being perceived as a racist rape crime now.
Right. That's right. Because, you know, when Michael Brown was shot and that first wave of violence in Ferguson was August 9th through August 26th or 25th, I think Daniel was arrested like either August, I think it was right after that, at the end of August. I don't have that date in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they were obviously really conscious that that was going on and that they needed to handle this the way that it, you know, that wouldn't have the same result that the police chief in Ferguson had.
Right.
He lost his job and their city burned.
All right, let's play this next one.
I was just talking about this issue of whether Daniel's DNA could be found on the fly of his pants, because we talked about how in all 4 samples of DNA from the fly of the pants, there was actually male DNA of unknown origin. We don't know for sure the male or males from whom that came. And Prosecutor Giger has made a statement on December 13th, 2016 in a Channel 4 K4 news clip that shows once again he does not understand the evidence.
If what they are trying to get people to believe, which is not accurate, is that it could transfer from a purse to hands to pants to inside of pants. Significantly, Daniel Holtzclaw's own DNA was not found on the inside of his uniform pants. I think that speaks probably louder than anything I could argue as to the ability of someone's skin cells from their hands to get transferred to a piece of fabric.
We talked about articles that show, in fact, DNA can transfer from a person's hands to objects. This has been known for over 20 years. So that part's an error. But the other part that's an error is when Mr. Giger claims that Daniel's DNA was not found on the fly of the pants. He got this claim from his DNA analyst, Elaine Taylor, who testified in the trial that Daniel was excluded from contributing DNA to all 4 samples of the fly of the pants. And Prosecutor Giger's argument then in the trial was that if you can't find Daniel's DNA, then surely that would mean he didn't touch the fly of the pants with his hands, and therefore DNA matching the teenager on the fly couldn't have come from Daniel's hands, otherwise you would have found Daniel's DNA. That argument is flawed, and it breaks down for several reasons. Number one, Elaine Taylor was incorrect when she argued that you could exclude Daniel from being a contributor to the fly of the pants. Most obviously, in the 2 interior samples where there was a Y chromosome that she failed to disclose during the trial, or in her written report about her findings, that Y chromosome with a low level of it present could have come from Daniel, but they did no testing of the Y chromosome to see if its alleles matched what you'd expect from Daniel. So it was simply wrong to conclude that there was no DNA from Daniel because they could not tell that. The results were actually inconclusive. For the 2 outer samples from the fly of the pants, those were mixtures of at least three or more people. When you have complex DNA mixtures, that would be mixtures from at least 3 people, it is not possible to conclusively say that a person is excluded from contributing, because actually many alleles that match Daniel's DNA profile were found in those 2 samples, just not all of his alleles. And so we don't know, was it that his DNA was not there at all, or was his DNA there at low levels so that only some of the alleles that matched Daniel were detected? The conclusion should be that it's inconclusive as to who contributed to those samples and whether he could be excluded or not. In Elaine Taylor's written reports, for 3 of the samples, the second one, which was partially inside, and then the 3rd and 4th from the inside, she correctly wrote in her report that the data were inconclusive as to whether the contributors who contributed very little DNA were a particular person or not. So she was correct for those samples in saying it was inconclusive as to who those minor contributors could be. But for the exterior sample, which was a mixture of many people's DNA at approximately equivalent levels, during her written report, she actually stated that Daniel Holtzclaw could be excluded, and I feel that was an error from what I've read about forensic analysis of DNA mixtures. When you have a mixture where there are many alleles present from a variety of people at approximately equal level, you just can't tell whom they came from, especially when there are some lower level alleles, not at high levels, where it's possible that not all of the person's alleles were detected. So she made this error in her written report, but then especially in the trial, she contradicted her written report statement that there were inconclusive results, when in the trial she claimed that Daniel was excluded as a contributor. Mr. Giger, however, latched on to her argument that there was no DNA from Daniel, and then he, like he said to the press in December of 2016, used this claim that Daniel's DNA was not present to argue against the possibility that Daniel just innocently transferred DNA from the teenager and others on the to the fly of the pants through his hands. A final error that Mr. Giger made is revealed in a December 2016 statement he made to the press, to K4 News, and he was talking about his belief that vaginal fluid was found, and yet simultaneously he believed that there was no test for vaginal fluid. So he said a very peculiar, internally inconsistent statement.
Fluid containing the skin cells is absorbed into the pants, and that's what we have. If Mr. Holtzclaw or his supporters are advocating that there is a test that determines that this is vaginal fluid, they are lying. There is no test that does that.
So this is incorrect for several reasons. Like we said, there was no testing done to see if there was vaginal fluid. However, in fact, there is a presumptive test for vaginal fluid. There's at least one lab in the U.S. that can do a presumptive test. A presumptive test means if you get a positive result, it could come from vaginal fluid, but there are other stains or liquids that could give that positive result also. However, it is a test that can be done, and alternate light sources are useful for even detecting if there's any kind of staining at all that's not visible to the naked eye, and that was not done. So that could have been done too, to try to see if there was any kind of fluid. So the statement is very odd because on the one hand, Mr. Giger's giving his speculative claim that there was fluid that absorbed into the fly of the pants, presumably vaginal fluid, because he's arguing in favor of there having been a rape. But then he acknowledges there's no test for vaginal fluid. So how can you claim you have vaginal fluid when there was no way to test for it? That makes no logical sense. It's completely unscientific. So this is an example of why I would worry about Mr. Giger for the state of Oklahoma being the one to have any kind of legitimate ability to question scientists about what the evidence was and whether the DNA evidence was significant, because I don't believe he understood it.
Kate, did they ever test Daniel's genitals?
No, they didn't.
Interesting.
Yeah, he submitted to everything that they asked of him. They could have done a penile swab. I think Kim Davis explained that because she assumed like that most people change underwear, that he would have taken a shower. And so that's her understanding of how that would, you know, I guess clean the inside of his penis.
Yes, but I mean, you think you would exhaust all avenues?
No, just the ones they needed is
Right,
what
exactly,
happened.
to
So
fit their narrative, right?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can only conclude that they just didn't want to create any more work or any more questions, because, you know, you look at this from the beginning and they were never following the facts, or they were never searching for the truth.
You know, they had it seemed like a one-dimensional thought process,
Yeah.
and one direction they wanted to go.
Yeah, they weren't looking at other things ever.
Right.
Or people.
I know last week, or the last episode, episode 3, someone brought up polygraph tests. And that was one of the things I kind of wanted to address real quick while Sancho's queuing up the next video.
Sure.
Polygraph tests are extremely unreliable in the best of circumstances. let alone with drug addicts who may be coming down, may be recovering, may be on other substances to get better or whatever. So, I mean, I can definitely see why a polygraph you would not want to do a polygraph on these ladies. Now, it'd be interesting to give Daniel a polygraph, even though it's not admissible, and it's also high risk as well if you give
Right.
it to him.
Well, if they would have been able to schedule it right then, he would have had one because he submitted to one. But he went home and called his dad, and then the FOP and had an attorney appointed to represent him, and she said no when they called the next day to give the time. So it never happened.
I'm sorry, I don't recall. Matt and I are both officers. We're not lawyers.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, the polygraph. I studied. So when I was taking my criminal justice courses in college and everything, in a couple classes we discussed the polygraph, and it's shocking how unreliable it is, and yet now most states it's not admissible in court. Some states it's not admissible. Period. Some states it's not admissible unless the prosecutor and the defense attorney agree to use it in court. But it's just shocking though, like, because they still use it for hiring in police. Police to hire police officers as well as other jobs. They'll get polygraphers to scan their applicants and stuff like that. And so, it's a tool like anything else, if you can get somebody to admit to something, but at the same time to rely heavily on that, especially in a court case or something, it's not a good idea.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys watched Making a Murder season 2.
Yes.
They give Stephen Avery, I can't remember what it's called. Do you remember, Harry? Like a brain?
Yeah, I don't remember the name of it either. It's definitely a more high-tech one where they're actually analyzing the brain waves rather than blood pressure and physiological responses. But I can't remember what it's called.
Fingerprinting of the brain or something like that. But
brain mapping or something. I can't remember either.
Something like that. Someone will put it in the chat, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, that'd be interesting to see.
Yeah.
All right, let's continue with this. She's really good. She's really good.
Just we're coming up on 2 hours now, Sancho, right?
Yeah, Katie, you're cool.
I can go 5 hours if you want.
There you go. All right.
I'm gonna have to get off in a little bit because I got work tomorrow morning. So,
right. So this is a 3-minute clip, Matt. I'm gonna pass it off to you after that for your last words, if you got,
Sure.
It's always been that Mr. Campbell Ruddock, because of his science background, even though he's working for the police, that as a scientist he would critique and criticize the forensic analysis and courtroom testimony of his analyst, Ms. Taylor, because we all can make mistakes, but what's important is when we recognize them, that we try to recognize them and then correct them and make sure that they never happen again, because Daniel Holtzclaw did not get a fair trial. And if these errors in the forensic analysis for his case occurred, it is possible that they occurred in other cases as well. So this doesn't just affect Daniel. It affects anyone in Oklahoma who ends up being accused of a crime. Campbell replied to my questions about DNA transfer and whether when you find DNA on some evidence item, you can use it to conclude that a crime had occurred or that it meant anything more than maybe just people had shaken hands and then touched something. He said, "You have absolutely stumbled across the major point with contact or trace DNA in that it is by no means absolute. There are many, many reasons why your DNA could be serendipitously present or not." He wrote, "You can get DNA from a few cells. You can get DNA from a few cells. Great. That means we can solve anything. No way. What DNA practitioners often overlook in the zeal to apply what they do is that we don't know anywhere near as much about it as we think we do. For example, the key is always, can you produce data or studies to support this hypothesis? That's Science 101. But with trace DNA, we really know very little about how trace DNA acts. There are so many variables involved that it makes interpretation of the circumstances very complex. In forensics in general, I think this is often forgotten in the rush to connect the dots. This quote really relates to Elaine Taylor's incorrect statements. She was advocating for the presence of vaginal fluid or saliva without doing any tests for them. She was concluding based on DNA that the likelihood of there being fluid was more likely than just a non-intimate touch. And she also ended up, based on the DNA samples, concluding incorrectly that you could exclude Daniel as a contributor when the data were actually inconclusive. Then Mr. Giger ended up taking the incorrect DNA analysis and rushing to connect the dots from those results to his belief that Daniel was guilty. He created an argument that did not make scientific sense.
There you go. Matt, we'll start off with you.
Oh, I mean, she's absolutely right, and I love the quote from the guy talking about how, yeah, we know a little bit about DNA, but there's still a lot we don't know about DNA. I mean, it was only really recently discovered within the last century and put to good use. So I mean, yes, I think DNA can have really good can be good for solving cases and that kind of thing, but at the same time there's still a lot of confounding variables and all kinds of other stuff that you have to consider, and you can't just hedge your bets on one thing. You got to try to work multiple angles if you're looking to convict somebody. So I mean, now they had the testimonies and stuff like that in this case, so I mean that helped them with the DNA, but at the same time it's just there's so much more research and stuff we need to do on this subject to better understand it, better get a grasp of it. That way we can not have cases like this where we can have people getting convicted that are maybe they're innocent of the crime they're being accused of.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that though at the very least our crime lab analysts should have a good grasp on this. And Campbell Reddick was the supervisor. He acknowledges he should have made sure that his people under him are not tunnel vision, or they're not rubber stamping something for the detectives or the DA, as Oklahoma County has a history of doing. She's not the first analyst that was not qualified to be an analyst.
It'd be interesting if you could send the evidence to the FBI laboratory for DNA testing. They're definitely by far more versed in it. The equipment they have is second to none.
I'll have to check and see if that was, I don't even know if that was attempted or if it's something that's happening. I'd like to know.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, a lot of major cases, especially serial cases, usually a prosecutor would request that just for transparency, especially when your lab has already been tainted in media reports. You would want an outside source to back up your evidence.
I'm not even sure how much of the DNA sample is left because it was such a small sample, and I'm not, an analyst, or I don't even understand what 40 nanograms means.
Right. I mean, if anything, by the Stephen Avery case taught me at least that they don't need much to be able to get a spectrum. And also, even if they would run a full spectrum on Daniel's uniforms, find other areas and stuff. I mean, it just, like I said, in case of this nature, the case of this caliber, you would think that the DA would want to have a complete transparency. Say, listen, I know my lab's got some issues. We sent this to an outside source for a second opinion.
Mm-hmm. Something I wanted to bring up too, to kind of touch back on how much we don't know about DNA. There's a principle that is talked about in forensics and it's something that you learn when you start taking, very basic classes that talk about forensics. Are any of you guys familiar with Locard's principle?
I'm not.
I'm not.
Sancho?
Am not.
Okay. Wow.
No.
All right. So Locard's principle. Locard was he was a scientist, I believe. I don't remember exactly when, but he suggested. He was kind of one of the first people to kind of push the spur of studying forensic science and that kind of thing. And basically, the principle states that anytime that you enter a crime scene, you always bring something in with you and you always leave something behind. Now, what it is that you bring in and leave, we may not be able to know that necessarily, but at the same time, through further research and stuff like that, we can always, in examination, we can always find that out. Because, there's all kinds of different types of forensic sciences, from DNA to fingerprinting to, using tool marks. It's just amazing all the different kinds of sciences and different things that forensic analysts can do when looking at crime scenes and trying to determine certain things. But it's a again, it just goes to show you how much we don't know and how we can always improve our research and our grasp on this stuff a lot better.
Yeah, that's interesting. I knew the principle of that. I didn't know that's what it was called. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, Katie, do you want me to play this one next?
Oh my gosh, yeah, play that.
Kind of give us a preview of it. Like, what are we going to look at?
So, 2 jurors were interviewed after the verdict. This is one of them. And as I was kind of listening to all these DNA videos that we've been playing in a row, I noticed that I was kind of zoning out a few times. So this will be really interesting. I concur with this guy.
Awesome. Oh, wait.
They also believe 17-year-old Adara Gardner, whose DNA was on Daniel's fly.
Well, I'm not a DNA expert. They told us it was DNA from the vaginal fluid from a 17-year-old. The DNA people are pretty boring, to be honest with you.
Oh.
In the case of Sherry Ellis, who's
Ouch.
Boring.
Man, I want my jurors to try to get it right when they're going to send me to prison for 263 years. Kind of boring.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
So this is essentially her bio. As a biologist from Iowa.
Yeah.
There kind of is a good preview on it. Anything else from this that we didn't go through? All right, here we go.
Oh, yeah. I think this is old if you want to just skip this part.
Yeah, we did go through that already.
I was going to use that until Erica sent me a bunch of good stuff.
Elaine Taylor?
Yeah, man. We need an expert on to look at those stuff.
Right.
So
left fly inside, right fly inside, 1 full swab, DNA IQ, performed September 29, 2015.
Yeah, that DNA stuff's kind of boring. I don't know what this means.
I think it's talking about what the collection and what they recovered, basically. I don't know anything about that because it's very
talk.
Yeah, this is very way over my head. So,
well, someone watching this is going to recognize it. So I'll flash
Sure,
it up.
yeah, I'll throw it up there.
I'll flash it up for a few.
Yeah, on the left side shows the sample uniform pants. Left flash over the left part of the zipper, I'm assuming. And that's
yeah. So there are 4 samples, and I know they're labeled like Q something, maybe Q1 through 4, whatever. I can't see the letters though.
Right.
Any scientist that wants to blow that up and look it up could.
The pants?
Yeah, the pants. Those are the pants.
Do you want me to zoom in more? That's too much.
Looks
Oh,
like
that's too
some
much.
pants.
Pants and belt.
Those are the only 2 items they collected in the same bag.
What did they do with his duty belt?
They let him take everything else home with him.
Wow.
All they took was his pants and belt.
Because you would think there'd be hair in the duty belt also. If he had his duty belt on the whole time.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
you would think, because Kayla Lyles said that the gun was hitting her in the butt when he was keeping her. So, and he also supposedly raped Adara Gardner on her mom's front porch in broad daylight through the unzipped fly of his pants too. So he would have.
So are you able to see that list right now, the facts about the forensic evidence in
Yeah.
Daniel Holtzclaw case?
Mhm.
I'm going to say one, and like Katie, if you want to say one, pretty much the DNA matching a 17-year-old's profile on the fly of Mr. Holtzclaw's uniform pants had a valid non-sexual explanation, non-intimate skin DNA, indirect transfer, Charles Scrim, percentage P4083.
Yeah, so these came from the 6 experts that came together and tried to, make a difference with Daniel's appeal. And I think their document is what caused the secret hearings to happen too. So detectives only collected Mr. Holtzclaw's uniform pants and belt from a DNA lab report June 19, 2014. They did not collect underwear and penile swabs that could have offered more data to test hypothesis.
I'm not trying to hijack your panel, Sancho, by any means. I think this would be kind of a neat segue into the appeal and the current appeals process.
Yeah.
Let's do that, because we have some discussions on the appeal process to go through. I am waiting to report fact sheet. Where did you send me the appeal stuff? On Discord, Katie, or on email?
Let me see which item it is here.
The list is the one thing we haven't done is the meeting and the list is the 2 things.
That's okay. That's at the beginning, so we can just carry on with what we're doing.
Files appeal. Here we go. This is the video on the appeals.
Hey, Sancho.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and jump off. Like I said, I got to get ready for work, and so
I'm going to miss you.
So, like I said, I wish I could stay on here longer, but,
Wow.
But
thank you for coming, and enjoy your night.
I appreciate you inviting me on. Goodbye, Harry.
All right, bro. Stay safe.
All right. I will. Katie, nice to meet you.
You too. It was
Y'all
nice
have a good discussion.
chatting with you. All right.
Oh, that's not it. All right. That's not it.
Appeals.
Final forms appeal. Here we go.
And Glitterbug, you'll learn to love that word eventually.
Yeah, Jess H is distracting me, so.
Same here. Well, not Jess H.
Yeah.
Some
This is my birthday, February 1st.
Nice.
An ex-cop appeals his sexual assault conviction.
Could be.
Daniel Holtzclaw is doing 263 years for sex crimes against women while he patrolled Oklahoma City.
And tonight, News 9's Lisa Monahan tells us he and his attorneys claim, among many things, insufficient evidence. Lisa?
Now, Daniel Holtzclaw's attorney raised that issue and several others with nearly 100 pages filed today, claiming he didn't receive a fair trial during the highly publicized case.
He simply had too many cards stacked against him that never should have been allowed in a court of law.
In the appeal, attorneys for Daniel Holtzclaw claimed the state had insufficient evidence, lumped too many crimes together, allowed a circus atmosphere. Also, prosecutors argued facts not in evidence. He had ineffective counsel, and the sentence is unconstitutionally excessive.
Finally, the Holtzclaw family can point to something in black and white and say this isn't just the family speaking. These are some very learned opinions from professionals that say that there were some things done that were extremely wrong.
Brian Bates began as the private investigator for the defense, and later the Holtzclaw family asked him to speak on their behalf, now in response to the appeal.
It covers just about everything that they were concerned with.
Namely, the issue of a circus atmosphere. Holtzclaw's attorneys claim publicity turned up dramatically during the 2015 trial due to the growing Black Lives Matter movement, with individuals taking pictures in the courtroom, protesting in the hallways, and even a victim testifying while admittedly high on drugs. The appeal also scrutinizes a key piece of evidence in the case, DNA.
Now we're finding out that DNA evidence very well may have been misrepresented. Some DNA evidence may not have been disclosed, and the prosecution's own DNA expert may have given testimony that was totally contrary to her own findings.
But Oklahoma County District Attorney David Prater responded, "I am confident the conviction is constitutionally and statutorily sound. Furthermore, I am confident of this convicted rapist's guilt."
Now, I also reached out to the attorney representing the victims in the Holtzclaw case, but did not hear back in time for this report. Lisa Monahan, News 9.
All right.
She probably reached out 5 minutes before.
Say that again?
She probably reached out 5 minutes before. They've not given Daniel a lot of coverage in Oklahoma since his conviction. So, you know, it took things like, well, they would cover him when he filed his appeal. But the secret hearings really got two reporters interested who advocated for actually having their stations cover it, but only two.
So I want to go to the secret hearings, shall we?
Yeah.
Let's go to the secret hearings, and then HB, we're going to get your opinion on that. Let's go to the Daniel Holtzclaw reacts to the secret meetings. So obviously the meetings occurred. Daniel had no idea about it, and we're kind of getting Daniel's reaction to the secret meetings.
New information surrounding the appeal of Daniel Holtzclaw, the former Oklahoma City police officer convicted of sexually assaulting women while he was on duty.
Now, last week we learned there had been an unusual closed hearing in district court, really raising questions about where the case is headed. Our Lisa Monahan has been digging for answers and even spoke with Holtzclaw himself today. Lisa? Yeah, Amanda, I was able to get an interview with Holtzclaw from his prison cell today, but that's not all. In an effort to understand what this hearing was all about, I requested surveillance video from inside the Oklahoma County Courthouse near the judge's chambers.
The doors were locked, the public shut out of Judge Timothy Henderson's courtroom. Surveillance cameras capture a team of prosecutors, including the lead in Holtzclaw's trial, arriving ahead of the proceedings. Not even Daniel Holtzclaw or his defense were privy to information discussed during the two-day secret hearing. Now, for the first time, we're hearing from Daniel Holtzclaw in his own words, responding to the secrecy surrounding his appeal.
I'm extremely upset about it because for my trial, I was very biased, and still to this day, it's that way. There were 2 full days where the secret hearing was going on, and my lawyer wasn't allowed to be there, let alone know about it. Also, the lead prosecutor in my trial, who lied, gets to weigh in on a response or have his input. How is this in any way, shape, or form fair to me? Not only should I be able to know what's going on the public, but the public has to know as well. If I was a hardworking taxpayer in Oklahoma, I'd be irate. I would be knocking on doors and trying to find an answer. More importantly, for the audience out there listening, this can happen to you, and my case can happen to you.
A court order prevents the lead prosecutor and others Holtzclaw mentioned from responding to his allegations, and the reason for his case being returned to trial court remains a mystery due to documents filed under seal. However, surveillance cameras captured witnesses, including a civil attorney for the city, a deputy chief Johnny Coleman, and OCPD's forensic lab supervisor Campbell Ruddick.
I've never seen anything like this, so it's something significant.
Scott Adams represented Holtzclaw at trial and says based on the people present for the hearing, it would be reasonable to assume it's related to the lab that provided DNA evidence in the case. But he says he can't fathom a scenario that deserves this level of secrecy.
Now, Daniel Holtzclaw opened up on several other issues, including DNA evidence that's become a focus of his appeal. I'll have more on that.
HB, what's your thoughts on that?
I'm blown away. I mean, I don't understand how they can have an ex parte meeting without his attorney being there. I'm not a lawyer. I mean, I just know enough about law to make me dangerous, but
right.
It's crazy they can have a closed door meeting and not provide any documents of what was discussed about his case. And
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
yeah, I mean, to me, that would be grounds enough by itself to say, okay, this case needs to be reheard again with no hidden agendas, no closed door meetings with prosecutor, labs, deputies. It's mind boggling.
So, Katie, what's the next video we're going to be playing right here? It's kind of.
It's okay. So Phil Cross from Fox 25, he kind of dug into this right away. We were just trying to get someone to pick up the secret hearings because they weren't reporting on the Holtzclaw case.
Sancho, while you're playing this video, I'm sorry, Katie, while you're playing this video, can you go through your DMs I sent you and see if you can find the address and phone number for that firm in Georgia I gave you?
To me?
Yeah, it was with the Catherine Zellner. I gave you two. It was Catherine Zellner.
Okay.
And it was another lawyer down in Georgia, another famous lawyer.
You gave me 2 lawyers.
Yeah.
And I'm stalling until I find out what it says.
No, that's fine. While you're playing the video, go ahead and look through it, like I said. And if not, I can find them in the morning. I can send them to you, or I can get Katie's email and I'll send them to her.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm trying to go through all the memes you send me.
Oh my gosh.
Sancho got a shock last week of a couple memes I created
we
for
don't
him.
want to talk about that.
He's in therapy still, and I apologize. But
we're skipping over that.
Yeah, it was about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, PTSD from it. Oh shit, I just saw it. Is it before that or after that, you son of a bitch?
It's way before that. It was after.
Oh yeah, so I have to get through that to get to this information.
Yeah, unfortunately, you have to do all past the hotel room.
Thank God I'm not sharing the screen.
Oh, that'd be a bad thing.
Thank God I'm not sharing the screen because of that meme, and you know what meme I'm talking about.
Oh, I absolutely do. It was awesome.
Senior citizens involved.
Yes, and hotel rooms.
Is it before the 15th or after the 15th?
Bro, I don't know. Except when was episode 2 that I participated in?
Yeah. You sent me Equal Justice Initiative?
Yes, that's the one. And Glitterbug, you're my hobby. Yes, Equal Justice.
I'm gonna put the link in the chat.
This is another organization, Katie, that is kind of along the lines of Catherine Zellner. They do a lot of pro bono work on high exposure cases to exonerate people who they believe are falsely accused. They actually did a movie on them recently, and about Jamie Lee Foxx was the main character, where they had freed this guy after something like 25 years in prison, and so it got a lot of good lawyers involved with them as well.
Cool.
And like I said, unfortunately, if Miss Zellner's not available, or at this moment at least, they might be another avenue to reach out to, and at least review the case and give you their opinion or something.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that.
No problem, ma'am.
Input. Okay, so this is Phil Cross summarizing all the shenanigans with the secret hearings and everything being sealed, and they're just not going to let the public know what's going on. One court passes it to the other court, that court passes it back. No one has answers.
There's a new development in a case of a cop convicted of rape, but here's the twist. The courts have ordered all details about it covered up. And as Fox 25's Phil Cross shows us, their curtain isn't just closing on the public's right to witness justice.
Our story begins here at the Oklahoma Judicial Center, where the Court of Criminal Appeals meets. Now, this is where the state is fighting to keep Daniel Holtzclaw in prison. Now, the state recently filed a motion under seal, which is uncommon, but not unheard of. However, the court took it a step further and issued a protective order over all this new information and then kicked the case back to Oklahoma County. So here we are at Oklahoma County District Court. When we first asked the court here, they said the case was all with the Court of Criminal Appeals, so they tossed the legal ball back to the state's Justice Center. Here's where it all gets a little weird. The court is even keeping this new information secret from Daniel Holtzclaw's own attorneys. And when we asked what was supposed to be happening in district court, the judges in this building told us we had to go back downtown. We tried to ask Judge Timothy Henderson, him right there, about when this mystery information was going to be heard in his courtroom, but his office says he can't comment on anything related to the Holtzclaw case. So we asked when this hearing would be set. His office says he can't comment on anything related to the Holtzclaw case. So we asked if the public would be allowed in the public courtrooms during this hearing, and, well, you guessed it, his office says they can't comment on anything related to the Holtzclaw case. So here we are back at the Court of Criminal Appeals, where we asked the judges why the need for all the secrecy and the legal justification for that, and also how that squares up with the oath they took to uphold the U.S. Constitution, which allows for public access to the courts, and the Oklahoma Constitution, which also allows public access to the courts. Here's what they had to say. Oh, you didn't miss anything. They didn't respond. So here's what we do know. The Oklahoma Attorney General's office, which is handling the case now, says the secret information is just that, a secret. They won't talk about it, except to say the district court will be holding an evidentiary hearing on the matter. Now, the Oklahoma County DA's office, which is not involved in the case anymore, says this new mystery information does not include new details dug up by the AG's office and does not include any allegations of wrongdoing by county prosecutors. So far, no court or agency has been willing to say why all the secrecy is needed or been able to provide the legal justification for keeping the public out of the justice process. Cross, Fox 25 News.
That is how you tell a story. Now, secrecy is becoming quite common since Daniel Holtzclaw's conviction. His information was deleted out of the Department of Corrections offender information site, and the agency won't say what prison he is at, even though every other prisoner's information is in that system.
Oh my God. So they have to slam him in some way, the local news does. They can't just see that he's getting screwed with secret hearings. They have to let you know that they think something's shady with his identity being protected while he's in prison.
And that's not uncommon for officers. I mean,
No, it's not.
ex-officers. It's for the protection.
Safety, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially given the nature of this case.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's the other part. Rapists are always targets in the first place. Now you have an accused rapist officer, so he's got two bullseyes on him now.
Yeah.
So let's kind of look at those secret court proceedings again, shall we?
Yeah.
I don't know how you look at them. I mean, I can't
All
believe the
new at
ACLU
9.
did not jump all over that.
Well,
No, they
I mean,
don't. That's
is
a
it-
black-white thing or something. I don't know why they didn't either, but
Is it fair to say that this was the birth of Black Lives Matter, or the
Yeah.
Ferguson?
Well, I
Ferguson
mean-
was it, or
yeah, Ferguson, and
Yeah.
this was number 2.
number 2, which is top 2, which is huge, you
Yeah.
know? And look what happened with the first one.
Well, this was going on while Ferguson was still going on. Because,
Right. So
you know, they
emotions
had,
were raw,
yeah, they had 3 waves in Ferguson.
raw emotion,
Yeah,
raw emotion. Let's go.
exactly.
New clues about the secret court hearing in the case of a cop convicted of rape.
Fox 25's Phil Cross got the surveillance video that shows who all took part in the secret hearings that even the defense wasn't allowed to attend.
The hearings happened this week. They began Monday when the prosecutors with the Oklahoma County DA's office arrived just before 9 a.m. Galen Giger, the head of the DA's Public Corruption Division, who also led the prosecution against Daniel Holtzclaw, was there. One of the witnesses, Oklahoma City Deputy Chief Johnny Coleman. He was in with prosecutors and the judge for more than an hour. Also present, a senior city attorney who handles civil litigation. The hearings lasted all day Monday and all day Tuesday. The AG's office, which is supposed to have the case now that it is in appeals, could only tell us the hearing was an evidentiary hearing. The DA's office has not returned our multiple calls, texts, or emails related to these hearings. However, when Fox 25 first broke the news about the secret orders issued by the Court of Criminal Appeals, DA David Prater said the issue had nothing to do with any wrongdoing by his office or his prosecutors, but said he could not say more. The videos also confirm Holtzclaw's defense attorneys were not present, and Fox 25 has learned they were not even told about the hearings until after they were over. Phil Cross, Fox 25 News.
Daniel Holtzclaw is serving his more than 200-year sentence for multiple sex crimes, including rape. His appeal is stalled at the Court of Criminal Appeals until whatever was discussed during the secret hearing is decided.
Katie, your thoughts?
Wow. I mean, Jesus. What the F? I don't know what to say about that. That's just like unbelievable that it's just made a few news cycles.
Absolutely, and I'm sorry to cut you off. It's like you're having an evidentiary hearing, ex parte, without his defense being there. So how is it legal?
It's not legal, but they just call it something else, and they say it's related to Elaine Taylor's personnel files because that's how they can keep it secret because no one's entitled to see that. I guess her personnel files secrecy, privacy is more important than a man's liberties.
No, Elaine Taylor, she's the forensic laboratory person?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so she's a state employee. Her
Yeah.
personnel file should be public record.
Well, they're not. That's the whole reason they're saying that all the seals happen and things are still redacted. Things are still under seal. So the next clip, I don't know if you're playing in order, Sancho.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. And now I'm back on track.
This is pretty dang cool, man. Brian Gates, who did, he has a website, Holtzclawtrial.com, that has everything related to this case. And he has 23 episodes of a podcast, too. So he went in, he is a private eye, so he went in and recorded his interaction with the Oklahoma court clerk's office. Just interesting stuff.
Hello.
Hi.
The reporter wanting to see that protective order.
Well, I'm not a reporter, but yeah, I want.
Oh, I don't know if you're a reporter.
Yeah.
Okay. The court sealed it because this is a very touchy. If you wish to see it, I've talked to them, then you're going to have to file a motion with the court asking to see it.
I guess, could I just have clarification? Your all's rule says the file for protective orders shall be accessible to the public.
I understand that, but it is, but after filing a motion and they know who you are and make sure that you're entitled to see it.
I'm the public.
I know, but I'm just telling you what the court told me. You can file the motion with the court and they will then consider it and give you access. But that is the only way you're going to be able to see it.
What's your name?
I'm Mike Ritchie, the clerk of the court.
Okay. Is there any reason why y'all don't follow your rules?
This is the court's rule. I mean, if you're going to say somebody's not filing, we file whatever the court gives us.
Right.
This is what the court decided, so you have to take this up with the court. I do not speak for the court. I can't give legal advice.
The only thing it says is that it was.
Okay, but anyway, I can't say anything other than that there's a gag order.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to argue about it. I'm just trying to understand.
I know, and I understand what you're saying, but I would just get clarification from the Court of Criminal Appeals about how they want to proceed. I can't speak to any further than that. Just say, that's what they told me, and that's all I can do.
But filing something under seal is not something that's that irregular. You've got a whole rule about it. So I'm trying to figure out why this filing under seal now doesn't follow your rules, but the other ones would.
Couldn't speak to that. The court will have to explain that to you, which I'm sure they will in response to your motion.
Okay, but it just clearly says, you say you're the court clerk, and it says this is what the court clerk will do, but you're saying you're not going to do it.
I was told to file it under seal by the court, and that's what I did.
Right, but it says if it is filed
I'm not going to
under
ignore
seal.
what the Court of Criminal Appeals tells me to do, and that's all I can do.
Okay, regardless if it follows the law.
I can't get into a fight with the court that I clerk for.
Okay, all right, thank you.
HB?
Okay, has this guy filed a lawsuit to get access to these records?
They did get access to some of the records, Daniel's team did, but I don't think it's all been, I don't think they've, I mean, some parts are still redacted based on them saying that it's Elaine Taylor's personnel records. So, yeah, motions have been filed, and I'm not prepared tonight, I guess, to tell you exactly when and what, but.
No, I understand. So basically his first, and I'm sure you get a tape coming up on, or a video coming up on this. So cutting through it though, his first appeal has been denied, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So
after 2.5 years of waiting.
So what's the next step then?
He went to the Supreme Court, the SCOTUS, and they declined to hear his case, which I think he expected. I mean, Rodney Reed's petition was before the Supreme Court at the time too. I was hoping that they might bind them together and hear them as like hear a group of those petitions as one issue, but I guess they didn't have an appetite for that at the time. So he's now working on his Oklahoma State Supreme Court appeal. I'm not exactly, don't have the date of when that's due in my head.
Just the amount of cover-up and missteps, and it is mind-boggling that it gets as far where a 20-year-old kid is now given 300 years in prison almost, and no one's willing to acknowledge these errors. And then you're having closed-door meetings with people about evidentiary procedures.
Yeah, well, we have an incestuous group of people who have a lot of power in Oklahoma, and specifically Oklahoma County, but not specifically Oklahoma County. We have a lot of history of this corruption in our state. I mean, we've been through 2 governors and neither one of them cared to even look at it.
Hold on one second. Let me bring somebody up and see if... Hello, Mr. Liberty Bird.
Man.
Have you been following this episode tonight?
I am. And I got to say, I am quite intrigued. And it seems like a ton of research has gone into this, which presents me with my own set of questions. However, don't stop for me. Continue on, and I shall just be a bug in the back.
Well, we're gonna play one more video, and then we'll definitely get some questions thrown at Katie after this video, Bird. Okay.
Okay.
Here we go.
Now, new at 10, the mystery surrounding another ex-Oklahoma City officer's legal troubles is mounting. The Court of Criminal Appeals filing more motions under seal in the Daniel Holtzclaw appeal. It's one our Lisa Monahan has been following closely since the court held seemingly unprecedented secret hearings. Lisa?
Well, Kelly, we've been digging for information on these hearings for nearly a month now. The court transcripts, the judge's ruling, and even the order that asked for it all to be sealed is now sealed too. And while the court probably has its reasons for keeping all of this information confidential, the lack of transparency is really raising a lot of questions.
The problem I see is that it lends credence to the public not trusting in what's going on.
With that in mind and the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals policies in hand, we went after the protective order filed with the court clerk, the one dictating all of the secrecy in Daniel Holtzclaw's appeal.
The court sealed that order. Normally that order is not sealed, but the court in this case did seal it.
We pushed back because the OCCA rules state even when the information is sealed, the protective order shall be accessible to the public.
Rules, they're written by the court, and the court can override their own rules.
No, just an oddball. You know, everything seems to have not.
Now, these employees are not the authority, but court clerk Michael Ritchie was not there when we stopped by. He did, however, tell Holtzclaw advocate Brian Bates something very similar.
The court sealed it because this is a very touchy. I'm Mike Ritchie, the clerk of the court.
Bates says he posted the recorded conversation to social media to incite public outcry demanding transparency.
I want some answers, and I think that it should be very eye-opening to all Oklahomans when you try to follow the rules and the court makes up their own rules as they go along.
Legal analyst Irvin Bach says the rule seems pretty clear, so the court must be trying to protect someone or something questionable in the case.
And the idea that if it says public access and you can't see it just makes people more suspect of what's going on.
Now, no one knows the next step here or if there will be another closed hearing, but we were told to check back here tomorrow. Of course, we'll do that for you. Live on the scene on the story, Lisa Monahan, News 9.
All right, Katie, first you.
Well, I mean, Box is talking about, you don't want to make people suspect, or you would think people would be suspect of this, when actually the people of Oklahoma didn't really seem to care. I mean, this didn't stay in the news very long. We live in a state where they're happy with the kind of law and order kind of government, and kind of maybe rather safe than sorry. A lot of people never look into this case farther than what these same news channels reported when they were had him convicted before his trial. And so, you know, I think some people in their stupidity are happy to see him locked up just in case, because 13 women couldn't, you know, couldn't all be saying the same thing. And I mean, I could see if like it was like one or two or maybe even three, but not 13. That's the kind of shit you hear.
Yeah, and like we were saying earlier, all their stories matched up too perfectly to each other. You know, and the one thing I would suggest, and again, I'm sure you guys are doing this already, is just keep banging on that drum every level you can. I would hit the Justice Department. I would hit ACLU. Definitely reach out to Equal Justice, any other organizations. I mean, how they can say his civil rights were not violated by a closed door ex parte meeting alone, to me, would be enough for an appeal, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could do another show down the road and look at some of the responses from the court.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Done. It's, you know, we already talked about extending this a little bit, maybe a week or two from now, kind of. There's so much to get to that that's the challenge with this case, because it's a battle between showing all of the facts and killing all the false narratives that have been out there. And the killing all the false narratives that will be out there is the biggest challenge, because there's so much fake bullshit out there that is very timely, you know?
Yeah.
So who's to decide what's fake and what's real? I think would be my first question. And I think Kate just hit on a huge point. I think to my personal public concern is you have 13 supposed victims whose stories are all pretty similar, or as you expressed, maybe too close to being similar.
Not all of them, but some of them, yeah.
So I mean, and I think that does one of two things, right? So it either shows a massive amount of collusion on the government's part to pull in these victims against this one officer for their narrative, and or it showed the district attorney a pattern of this guy doing this habitually, and the pattern seemed to be a very routine, broke down. You know, you get away with it once, you map it out, and then you keep doing it, you keep doing it, you keep doing it. You know, so there's some questions from my end on how I feel about it, because I don't know one way or another. I'm kind of at this point where my hands are in the air, and I'm on some. I don't know where this guy's guilt lies. If it's wrong, you know, if he did it or if he didn't do it, and that's why we got to rely on the courts. And I think that you guys also brought up something very interesting that I've been seeing in my life, and that is illegitimate proceedings. You know, when should they have these closed discussions that are actually proceedings for your conviction, when you're not even, you know, knowledgeable, and your fucking counsel's not even knowledgeable that they're taking place. These are huge issues.
Absolutely. And also, if you watch the interviews, the detectives interviewing the victims, they were actually spoon feeding them details of the case to get them to answer the questions they wanted, to get them to answer the questions they wanted them to. And it's bizarre.
Well, and I'm not going to make any presumptions on this guy's taste, but if I were to look at the lot of women that are in these photographs, and I compare them to, you know, this supposed predator, I'm not really looking at women that a predator would typically attack.
And I can disagree with you. Rape is not about looks. Rape's about power.
Well,
Especially
yeah, but
rapists.
let me correct my statement on that, or clarify. I'm not saying based on their attractiveness. I was more basing on some of those women look pretty damn rugged, in the sense that if you try to do some shit, cop or not, they'd probably scratch back and fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many of them have been arrested for assaulting police officers and being arrested. Several of them.
So I mean, that I just find that difficult to believe that women that, you know, are that look as rugged as that, you know what I mean, that seem like they've been through the system long enough, would have, you know, anything but prejudice, first of all, and secondly, you know, would they not at least attempt to scratch back. I mean, I don't care if you're a cop. I don't care if you're a judge. I don't care if you're a Girl Scout selling Girl Scout cookies. If you go to maliciously physically harm me, I'll protect myself, you know, but only to the extent of, you know, the point where I feel like I'm protected. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to hurt someone that's not a threat. You know, at the same time, if you're being raped, you're obviously going to be scratching back. You're obviously going to leave some type of marks, and it would probably be intelligent to do them in areas that would prove that there was a rape taking place.
Yeah.
Well, especially your genitals in their mouth. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, that's exactly right. You know, that many of the women, several of the women, they always were confrontational with cops when they were getting arrested. So if they were getting assaulted, wouldn't you think they would even be more so? I don't know. And the flip side of that is Holtzclaw, his whole life has been a health nut freak, takes all these supplements, does all these things to take care of his body, yet he's going to engage in sex without a condom with a high risk group of people.
Right.
Chose that high risk group of people to do that to because they wouldn't tell on him. It's just not consistent. It doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, I'm sure there's boxes and boxes of evidence we have not seen. I'm sure this is a tip of the iceberg by all means.
Oh, yeah.
But like I said, just by this alone in this 4-part, say 16-hour series that Sancho's put together, I mean, it's just, it raises enough reasonable doubt in my pea brain to go, this needs to be looked at deeper from a law enforcement perspective and a human perspective.
Yeah. Well, that's all Daniel Holtzclaw wants, is for people to look at the facts of the case and then make a decision. He's not saying, hey, go out and beg people to say I'm innocent.
Well, and it sounds to me like you don't even have that opportunity. The government's not going to give you any of that information.
No, they're not. They're not going to do anything except deny, deny, deny.
That's a problem.
Right, and that's what I mean. Liberty and I butt heads up quite often about procedures and law enforcement and everything. Him and I are spot on this one. It's like, I mean, how it's supposed to be transparent. If these court records are available, they should be available to everybody. Bird, myself, his attorney.
Yeah. Public is public.
Exactly. And to railroad this kid, and like I said, I go back to it again, have ex parte meetings behind closed doors, no matter how trivial they think they are. Well, clearly they're not trivial because they're covering them up. They won't release them.
Right.
So it's important enough to seal this information and not share it.
Yeah. Well, you know, David Prater, the DA, he does, I think he has a file on everyone. So people don't come up against him. He does whatever he wants. And then he gets on camera and acts all, you know, like he's
holier than thou.
Yeah. I mean, there's if we have, you want to, after these last few secret hearing videos, if you want to skip back up to the verdict section under number 5 and play that David Prater video of him talking about how proud he is of himself after the verdict. He really exposes himself.
Is that in the email or no?
Yeah, it's under number 5 under the verdict. But yeah, go ahead and play these that you have queued up right here, because this is the conclusion of what happened with the resolution. Or not
The
resolution.
veil of secrecy is lifting, if even only for a little bit, in the highly unusual case of the appeal of a convicted cop.
Daniel Holtzclaw has been kept in the dark, and the state is asking whether or not they should be able to turn over material that could bolster his claims that he was wrongly convicted. Fox 25's Phil Cross first revealed the secrecy in this case. Now he tells us what the new records show about the case.
In court documents, the Court of Criminal Appeals first said the public had no right to see. The case is called unusual. That's putting it mildly.
Very mild term. I've never seen it in my career. I've yet to find another lawyer or a judge that's seen anything like this.
Scott Adams represented Daniel Holtzclaw in his initial trial on charges he raped and sexually assaulted women while serving as an Oklahoma City police officer. He does not have anything to do with the current appeal, but has been kept in the dark just as much as the attorneys that are. Newly unsealed records reveal the state found information that could help Holtzclaw, but the court has yet to rule on whether or not it will be turned over to the defense. The Attorney General's office cites an exemption in the Open Records Act about personnel records, indicating it was a personnel action that led to the discovery.
During that matter, they apparently found some information that is extremely important or exculpatory in regards to Daniel's case. They're using that as an excuse not to turn over that information, and they're trying to get the judge to say you don't have to turn it over because you found it in this personnel matter.
Fox 25 has previously reported on the secrecy surrounding Holtzclaw's case, and that a secret 2-day hearing involved questions about DNA and the DNA expert who testified at Holtzclaw's trial.
His constitutional rights, Daniel's constitutional rights, override any of that. And if there's anything exculpatory out there under the United States Supreme Court cases, it's got to be turned over to the defendant.
The court records say the witnesses, including the head of the DNA lab and the deputy chief of police, were thoroughly examined, but they were only questioned by the prosecutors and a judge. There was no cross-examination, and there is an attempt to continue in secrecy.
No matter what happens now, to me, the Pandora's box has been opened, because eventually we're going to be able to dig in here and figure it out. It may be years, but we're going to figure out what's going on here.
Problems with the Oklahoma City Police Crime Lab has the potential to impact hundreds, if not thousands, of cases. Emails obtained by Fox 25 already show a concern about the need for retesting of DNA evidence due to the situation surrounding a former lab employee.
We've seen it before, and we obviously didn't learn any of our lessons from what happened with Joyce Gilchrist.
Ultimately, no matter how you feel about the Holtzclaw case, this is going to affect you, the taxpayer. Taxpayer funds have already been used for the secret hearings, and if there's a new trial, it will cost even more. And that doesn't even take into account the emotional impact on those who say they were victimized by Daniel Holtzclaw. Phil Cross, Fox 25 News.
Holtzclaw's attorneys are also asking the court to stop Oklahoma City from destroying more evidence related to the problems in that DNA lab. Now, the court called Fox 25's reporting on the matter unsubstantiated, but asked the Attorney General to weigh in before they issue a ruling.
All right, there's that one. That is interesting to say the least, guys.
It's disturbing, the first probably 20 seconds of that clip where he says the state possibly has evidence that would exonerate him, but they're not willing to disclose it.
Yeah.
It's like, that doesn't smack you in the face with a shovel.
Yeah,
Now-
it's Daniel in the face with the shovel for sure.
Let me ask you this though, does it bother you as much when it happens to other people? And the reason I throw that out there is because this is happening in our criminal justice system on a weekly, daily, but we can jump into monthly, yearly. It's a routine and it is a cycle. I mean, I had my personal experience, and I'll tell you right now, dude, I'm not the perfect guy in the fucking world. At the same time, I'm not out there fucking robbing people or committing big crimes. That being said, I took my information to the DA, information that should have exonerated me, right? And my experience is the same as this guy's. They want to suppress that shit. They want to not accept it. They will look at it and then turn a back to it and proceed to criminalize you anyways. That is a problem, because we have, a standard that we recuse the guilty and we protect the innocent. And if someone has information that ultimately, proves them to be innocent and it can exonerate them from criminal charges, it's your obligation as a district attorney to take that information and to quit criminalizing someone who is innocent.
Yeah, we need more DAs like the new DA in that docu-series Outcry. If you guys haven't checked that out, check that out.
No, I haven't seen that yet, but
yeah, me either.
I got to drop off here shortly because I got work early in the morning. I was up late last night arguing with some idiots, and as I mentioned, Kate, I'd love to definitely follow up with Sancho and you guys, even offline, to find out how's Daniel's doing, how his family's doing, and
are you on Discord?
Yes, ma'am.
Come on over. I'll hook up with you and Daniel's Truth on Discord.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I would definitely love to follow along. But as I mentioned also earlier, I'd be banging every drum you could. Like I said, I'd be hitting every agency, Department of Justice, hell, even Trump, since he's so pro law enforcement, ACLU, Equal Justice Project. I would not let Catherine Zellner, even though she's swamped, I would keep hammering on her. You need an advocate like that who has that type of pit bull in them to go after a case like this.
Yeah.
And even if they just take everything themselves, look at it and say, he's guilty in our eyes, we're not going to waste our time or energy, that's fine. At least they did their due diligence. And like you said, Catherine was involved in the civil case, so she obviously believes in him as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is disturbing. Like I said, I don't know if this kid's guilty or not. There's enough on here that makes me hesitate to say he's guilty. And if I was on the jury, I'd be like, I can't say yes.
Yeah.
Reasonable suspicion, dude, is a big thing. And beyond a reasonable doubt is an even bigger
Absolutely.
thing.
That's true.
So I'm going to drop off, Sancho, as always, my brother.
Hey, great job,
I appreciate
man.
it.
Great job.
My
Appreciate
pleasure,
you,
bro.
man.
Thanks, Katie. You guys take care. I'll be in touch.
All right.
All right. Let's break down this. Let's break down this video, Liberty Bird, and I'm going to let you jump in first. Okay?
Sure, man.
Oklahoma County, State of Oklahoma, the State of Oklahoma versus Daniel K. Holtzclaw, case number CF 2014-5869. Verdict, count 1, sexual battery. We, the jury, impaneled and sworn in the above entitled cause, do upon our oaths find as follows. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and set punishment at 8 years. Count 2, procuring lewd exhibition. Not guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition. Count 3, burglary in the first degree. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of burglary in the first degree, nor lesser included. Count 4, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years. Count 5, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years. Count 6, defendant is not guilty of the crime of stalking. Count 7, defendant is not guilty of the crime of sexual battery. Count 8, defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy, and punishment is set at 20 years. Count 9, rape in the first degree. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree. Count 10, forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy, and punishment is set at 16 years. Count 11, rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree, and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 12, forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy. Count 13, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 14, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 15, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years. Count 16, forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy, and punishment is set at 16 years. Count 17, forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy. Count 18, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition.
We have
Count 19,
18 more to
procuring
go.
lewd
If you wanna
exhibition.
fast forward
Defendant is not
to
guilty of the crime of
18,
procuring lewd exhibition
whatever you
by
want.
instrumentation. In the first, defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 34, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 35, defendant procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition. Count 36, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition. Let me ask the jury, is this your verdict, so say you all? All right. Counsel, would you like to examine the verdict forms?
Not the same one. No, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Holtzclaw, if you and your attorneys just come forward.
He mouths to the
Mr.
jury,
Holtzclaw,
I
this
did
jury
not do
finds you
that.
guilty of the various counts.
Hard to watch.
Yeah.
You will be remanded to the custody of the Oklahoma County Sheriff for formal sentencing set January 21st, 2016 at 10 o'clock a.m.
Your Honor, I've asked to poll the jury.
All right, if you have a seat.
Freaking horrible, man.
There we go.
Yeah, they're gonna pull the jury, and Holtzclaw's gonna. There's his girlfriend in the right-hand side, the blonde. The sheriff handed a tissue.
There's no audio on the rest of this.
Yeah, they're pulling the jury, and then yeah, that's it pretty much. I mean, I don't know if they show his family or to the right of Galen Giger are the detectives, but yeah, it's just sickening to watch.
So I'm fascinated to see what Bird thinks of the body language, etc.
So the body language. I think that I'm big assessor actually on body language. And what I took in there was I thought that he was hopeful at the beginning before they mentioned the first guilty verdict. I think just the first guilty verdict was enough to crush that man and you know, ruin his hopes and dreams and aspirations. That's what I seen in his breakdown anyway. I didn't see a man that was crying because he got caught. I did see a man that looked like he was crying because he's just inherited a label that is life destroying and condemning, where he was hopeful for something else to happen. And that's sad to see that hope being thrashed on. At the same time, and this is where I try to maintain my objectiveness, is that there was a jury, and I don't know if the DA was into this malicious prosecution like we may claim, you know, may have happened. I think it'd be really interesting to see how that book reads out as the pages unfold. But a jury took in the information that was presented to them both by the defense and the prosecution. And at the end of the day, that collective group of his peers made the determination that he was guilty, and not just on one count, but multiple. That's pretty significant in itself. I don't see anybody coming to the conclusion of sentencing someone and or convicting them of something as heinous as that in any malicious way. Now, if that decision was solely based on a malicious prosecution by the district attorney's office and the suppression of substantial evidence that could have exonerated him, then yeah, I see that as a massive conflict. Yes, and that's not just deceiving us, the people, okay, by deceiving the jury, but that's ultimately colluding to create your own narrative to suit your own needs. For whatever reason. I don't know what kind of political gain you could possibly gain from that. But it's sickening to think that for a second that there might be information out there that could exonerate this man.
Well, at that time, you know, what they had to gain was that they weren't going to have a Ferguson in their city. They weren't going to have to deal with race riots and their city burning. And, you know, they would just take care of this and show people, you know, that they can trust the police. Because there was a lot of intimidation going on during the trial. People taking pictures of jurors, the protesters in the hallways in the same line to the restroom with jurors, to telling, I guess one protester thought she was talking to a juror and said, "You better convict him." So, I mean, there could have been, I believe that there were jurors that were just afraid of what would happen if they didn't, which is really sad, man.
I mean, I can't say that's not a possibility. I'm not saying that's not a possibility, Kate, but think about this. So if you were to go into jury, okay, and say that you had a high profile case such as this, but it could be anything, right? Any crime. And you were presented the information that you were presented, and would you say that if you were presented information that would ultimately leave someone in the position of being innocent and not being proved beyond a reasonable doubt, would you be willing to convict that person and destroy their life on the sole purpose that you were afraid of a public outrage?
Well, I don't know if that would be the sole reason that they did it, but I would like to think that I'm intelligent enough and open-minded enough that I wouldn't go along with the prosecutor's narrative about, I mean, I believe I would be able to see that they reverse engineered these cases against him using his own police records. I'm dumbfounded that people couldn't see that clearly.
And that's a problem. Yeah.
See that clearly, and I have a problem with that. So
well, I think there's multiple problems, Kate.
Yeah,
there's multiple problems with this whole system. I mean, like I said, like anytime you're having proceedings that are secretive, and especially if the judge is meeting with the prosecution, that is huge and condemning. And I think anytime that a government refuses to release any files that are supposed to be public record, it shows huge issues with transparency. And this is what they claim that they shoot for, right? This is what they're supposed to be striving for, is this transparency. Yet there is none when you're doing things by the law and they're being denied records that are supposed to be public access. That shows scandal.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, people think that I was friends with the family to be so involved in this case. I did not know Daniel Holtzclaw. I didn't know about this. I mean, I didn't meet his family until after he was convicted and sent to prison. I thought he was guilty just from the news. I didn't do any research on my own. I mean, I watched the 2-hour interview just to see if he was a good liar or not. So, you know, there's that.
All right, so right after that decision, there was the David Prater's response that we want to get into.
Yeah, this is after the verdict. Yeah, listen to what he says.
Here we go.
Well, justice was done today, and a criminal wearing a uniform is going to prison now.
Obviously, 18 of the counts, you didn't get a guilty verdict. What do you attribute that to? Some of the victims obviously there weren't convictions for some of the victims.
Sure. Well, in any given case, in any given trial, jurors are tasked with the responsibility of determining credibility and looking to determine if we've proven beyond a reasonable doubt every element of the crime. And obviously, in those counts, whether or not guilty verdicts came back, they determined that we didn't prove those cases beyond a reasonable doubt. Doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't believe the victims. It may mean that we didn't meet our burden in those counts. I want that to be clear. It doesn't mean that they didn't believe the victims.
David, there's a range of punishment. Are you going to ask for some consecutive, or any thought to that, or what?
Yeah, we want to assure this community that the Oklahoma City Police Department did the right thing, the Oklahoma County DA's office did the right thing, the jury did the right thing, and we're going to ask the judge to make sure that this defendant never sees the light of day, and we're going to ask him to run consecutive every count.
I know that there was some irritation on the prosecution part. You guys really haven't addressed it because the trial is going on, and that you guys are responsible for an all-white jury, and that's just not the case.
No, it's not the case. As a matter of fact, we wanted a good cross-section of our community, and we purposefully did not kick anyone of color off the jury. Felt that everyone would have been an appropriate juror in this case, and the defense they were the team responsible for kicking the African Americans off the jury. And as a matter of fact, we objected to that, hoping we would have a good cross-section of the community, and that objection was overruled.
There were some of the jurors that were crying in this case. Is that something that you have seen before?
Oh yeah, often. Let me tell you, we pull 12 people off the street who don't experience what police officers and district attorneys experience every single day in this courthouse. What we do is emotional because we're dealing with human beings. And we ask 12 normal citizens to come in and do the most difficult thing they'll ever do in their life, very likely. So I would wonder what was wrong with them if they weren't emotional or shedding tears, frankly, because these are human beings judging other human beings, and it's not easy.
Do you expect an appeal?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, there's an appeal in every conviction. And in a case like this, there's going to be appeals. But this was a well-investigated case, a well-prosecuted case. The judge, we believe, ruled on both sides of the issues and did it fairly. So we're not concerned about any reversal.
Thank you, sir.
In terms of the deliberations, obviously as they stretched into the fourth day, did you remain confident in your case?
We were confident in the investigation, first of all. We were confident in the case that was presented to this jury, and realized that when you have a number of victims and a number of counts, that if you have a jury that's actually doing its job, it's going to take them a while to get through it, because they have to look at each and every individual victim, each and every individual count, and go through each and every element in those counts. So if they're doing their job, I can't see how they would have spent much less time than what it took them to get to a verdict in this case. Very meticulous jury. They worked very hard. I appreciate their duty and their service to this community.
What would you say to members of the African American community who may be distrustful of police?
Well, I'll tell you, I hope they understand that the Oklahoma City Police Department and members of the law enforcement community in this county and the Oklahoma County DA's office will stand up for any person. Any person. I don't care what they look like, where they go to church, what God they worship, or how much money they make. We stand up for people in this community. The Oklahoma City Police Department proved that, and the Oklahoma County DA's office proved that. And I'll tell you, my experience in this county as a whole, that's the way we treat people in this county, across the board. And so the African American community, I'll say this to them as well. I appreciate you trusting us and standing down and making sure nothing foolish happened during the investigation of this case and during the trying of this case. You trusted us, and we appreciate that. The Oklahoma City Police Department did the right thing, and so did we, and you trusted us to do it, and I hope you know that we will continue to do that.
So don't burn our city.
There we go. So what's your thoughts on that, Katie?
Oh, I think he's just, I think he just exposed himself and saying, letting everyone know exactly why this case happened. Because what if they didn't stand down? What if they did riot? What if Ferguson came to Oklahoma City? What if? Thank you for standing down. And I don't know, he knows that it wasn't a well-investigated case, and he knows that his prosecutor misrepresented, lied about the DNA in his closing statement, and that was the last thing the jury heard. So I think what he just said was complete bullshit.
Bird?
Man, I mean, I've definitely seen a political agenda being played out there. I don't have much trust in dude, period. And with that being said, I'm gonna let you guys talk about it real quick while I do some daddy stuff.
You want to go, let's go see what a juror thinks about the case. Get that kind of perspective on a juror. I hope I'm not getting copyright strike with the news source.
I don't think so. These are all over YouTube.
Good.
It was very emotional, very intense.
4 days, 45 hours, countless tears, deciding a man's fate.
That can take a toll if you've never done it before. Disciplining your kids is one thing, and that's totally different. So it did take a toll.
Ron considers himself lucky to be one of 12 jurors who convicted a fired police officer of rape.
I'm proud to have done what I did. It's huge. very huge.
They found Daniel Holtzclaw guilty on half of the 36 counts against him.
The DNA evidence was very crucial. Seeing the AVL, the GPS tracking, noticing a pattern, noticing the pattern was getting worse.
How did you come to that conclusion on the not guilty verdict?
To us, not enough evidence, not enough, too many questions. They could have done this, they could have done that, and there just wasn't enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Ron says the jury reviewed a month's worth of evidence, accuser by accuser, one charge at a time.
I didn't take race, color, ethnicity into consideration at all. They were women, he was a man.
When you think of Daniel Holtzclaw, what comes to mind?
Abuse of authority, period. He used his authority and to benefit himself.
Count 16, forcible oral sodomy.
After the verdicts were read,
it was hard. I mean, he literally broke down, and he did, walking up to us, you know, before he went to the judge, worded to us, I didn't do it.
Mr. Holtzclaw,
You got it wrong.
Ron believes they got it right. They recommended Holtzclaw spend 263 years in prison.
Either way, he's going to be there for a long time. It all comes down to the state's burden of proof, and they proved it to us.
Ron says jurors had no idea that case gained national recognition. He says some of the jurors were concerned that protests could get out of hand, and he personally wants to thank the community for staying civil. Jessica Schambach, KOCO.
All right, Josiah, you've been watching this. I don't know if you've been watching the whole... I don't know if you were watching the whole series from the get-go. I think you have been.
I have.
What's your take on everything? Like, break it down for us.
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. See, the law works, you know.
Are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Can you hear?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. It's a sad case. Oops, I have to wait a minute. It's a sad case because the law works in strange ways, and the whole process of selecting jurors and the whole process of allowing evidence or not allowing evidence can sway a case. And I believe here that all the evidence that should have been presented was not. And that's what lawyers do. They try to suppress evidence.
You know, I look at it like a casualty count. You know, the big picture that they looked at is, you want one casualty or dozens? I mean, who knows how many casualties? You know, look what happened with the Breonna Taylor case. 2 officers were shot that night.
Yeah.
That night. So it looks to me, Liberty, like it's a casualty count where you kind of throw one to the wolves, knowing the wolves are going to go away hungry and not hungry anymore and happy.
I mean, man, I can't say that it doesn't happen, and I don't want to say that it didn't happen. At the same time, I mean, how deep is that, dude? And how deep is that rooted? If we're going to take it that far to where we're going to throw innocent people to the wolves just so they go home with full bellies. And then not only is the district attorney ultimately the one doing that, but then you have an entire jury that's doing that. That seems really hard to believe.
But the jury hasn't been provided all of the information that the lawyers have.
And that, my friends, I think that's a travesty in itself. Like, I was told by my lawyer that if I chose to take things to court, which I'm highly likely to win, right? The DA will probably hit me with 2 or 3 charges that I may not be able to win. You know, and all it would take is, you know, for them to, you know, tack that on right before trial. And why? To slap me down because I chose to say that I didn't do the things that you accused me of? I mean, and then what he pointed out, though, was that the jury would never know that that happened. They would just see the charges presented in front of them.
Correct.
And I'm on some, why wouldn't they know that? Like, I would testify and tell them that.
Well, you would only testify to what your attorney allowed you to testify to, and then the prosecutor could object. So
absolutely, and the judge is part of the bar too. Well, I mean, how are you going to have someone that is ultimately from the bar, right, and is just a colleague of these lawyers, the one that's ultimately put in a position of power to oversee these proceedings in the first place? Shouldn't he be from a third-party organization or the government?
Well, he is. The judge really doesn't have, okay, he can say, you know, sustained, overruled, but the judge is there to interpret the law, to place the sentence, or
well, I'm on some, correct me if I'm wrong. He's there also to create ordinance and order, right? Orders such as, hey, Mr. Records Keeper here, you know, district court clerk, you know, you're not going to release this information that's supposed to be released to the public. Who the hell does that? And when does you know, we take it to the point where the jurisdiction of these judges are now superseding the actual authority that we've given them in the first place?
Yeah, well, that's a judicial branch that does that. It's a separate branch of government that you're dealing with there. They have their own rules to play their game. Just like politicians have their rules to play their game.
Because we're playing with an executive branch.
Yes.
So let's go to forensic scientists. You know, you kind of want to get an opinion from forensic scientists. They're really smart.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing. I would definitely trust their opinion. So let's see what they got to say.
Don't take my word for it. We were lucky enough to catch renowned forensic scientist and criminal profiler Dr. Brent E. Turvey as he was between trials. He took a look at this video and analyzed the problems and showed us what should have happened.
Obviously, the first problem we have is that he's using his naked bare hand. If you're collecting evidence from a suspect or from a witness or from anyone involved in a crime, and you're going to move that evidence directly into an evidence bag, you need to wear latex gloves or mylar gloves to prevent your DNA from transferring onto the object. So what he's done is he's contaminated the inside of the bag with his hand, and he's contaminated the both items of evidence with his DNA, his detective's DNA, before putting them into the bag. That's how touch DNA works. It's very sensitive, and we could pick that up. The second thing is you must have only one bag per item of evidence. Now, to properly collect a pair of pants, you do not wad them up and throw them into a bag. That is completely improper, because what you're looking for is stains, other transfers, and patterns. Let's say maybe you're looking for a hair, maybe you're looking for blood, maybe you're looking for semen. We don't know yet because we're right now at the collection phase. So when you collect a pair of evidence like this, what you're supposed to do, wearing proper gloves, is you would lay it down on a piece of paper, a piece of white butcher paper, and you would roll the pair of pants up inside that paper like so. The paper would be creating a layer at each roll. So what you'd have is an item of clothing wrapped up inside what looks like a white roll. And then you would take that item, fold it, and put it into the bag. And then immediately you would have evidence tape, and you would fold the bag down like this. You would seal it with evidence tape, sign your name and assign an evidence item number right across it, put the date, the location where it was collected, all that information to keep and maintain a chain of custody. Because now you've secured it in such a fashion that you can test it at a later date and presume that you've not contaminated it. And you've not only have you prevented immediate contamination, you prevented future contamination from the object, you know, things shaking off of it, things patterns transferring around, hairs transferring around. Because when you open this bag at a later date, you're going to not only take out what's in the bag, you're going to look inside the bag and see if anything fell off during transfer. And here's the most important thing. If you're doing a real investigation, you don't know what's important until later on. So you want to make sure to protect the integrity of every piece of evidence you collect.
So all of these errors compounded by having multiple items in the bag as well creates more routes for possible contamination?
It shows an overall attitude of total disregard for the physical evidence. This guy doesn't care about the DNA. He doesn't care about the physical evidence. He's just doing what he thinks he has to do. He's doing this almost theatrical, like he's trying to use this as a mechanism by which he's going to get an inculpatory statement for Daniel to say, yeah, I'm going to take this, I'm going to send it to the lab. No, in reality, if you're really doing it properly, you go through a whole procedure and you have somebody do it who knows what they're doing. This shows somebody who doesn't understand physical evidence, who doesn't care about the physical evidence.
Wow, a total and reckless disregard for the evidence. Such a simple thing.
All right. Let's get everyone's
Wow.
thoughts on that.
Wow.
Josiah, you first.
Yeah, see, everything has a procedure. And if you don't follow that procedure, you just screwed up the whole case, because what genetic evidence is available has been contaminated. And that video just proved the point. Easily contaminated.
And it's frustrating to know that
It is.
that's
Because
something that gets shut down, you know?
anybody on the jury, they don't know this. And that evidence isn't presented to them, even though they have that evidence on video cam.
Right. So let's go, Katie, and then I'm going to go back to you. Let's play this video.
Man. After you do that, will you go back to where we were and play the end of Brent Turvey's? The best part was coming up next. I'm sorry.
You want me to do the 8:11 part first?
You can't. I mean, you can since you're already there.
All right. Do you know where this other part is, the 22-minute mark, or where is it?
It was exactly where you ended. I'm not sure.
I don't know where I ended it. Okay. Do you know where I began?
You
right now?
began at 17:21.
So I was at like the 20. Here we go.
Sorry.
For the evidence. Such a simple thing that could have such a profound effect on the investigation. While DNA was a key issue, there were many other problems. Retired NYPD detective and founder of Forensics for Real Inc., John Palucci, attended our screening of the Railroaded episode and had this to say about the interrogation video as a whole.
When I watched that interview of Daniel, how many people have watched that? Is that a piece of work or what? Work is the four-letter word choice right now.
Because Dr. Turvey is also a criminal profiler, we wanted to ask him about the key players in the investigation, the detectives, attorneys, and accusers. We started by showing him a clip of our interview with the lead detectives on the case. I wanted you to take a look at the answers that Detective Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory, the sex crime detectives who led this, and given that it was Daniel Holtzclaw who was calling in through his CIU unit with the Vruna records and never denied that he had come into contact with any of these women, what they did was take all that information and then reverse engineer by, as you say, going out and seeking out all of these women except for the very first accuser. So this is an exchange that I had with them about the lack of physical evidence at that first stop.
What were the results of the SANE test with regard to Jamie Liggins?
There was no DNA in her mouth.
She also said that at one point his hands were on top of the car, and at one point her hands were on the hood?
On the hood, yes.
And what were the results of the DNA tests on those?
They didn't DNA test those, they fingerprinted. You can't do both.
Okay, and what were the results of that?
They didn't get fingerprints.
Why do you think that is?
Because hundreds of people touched the cars, the weather, you gotta keep in mind, Holtzclaw's car was a pigsty. It was absolutely nasty.
Just go through to the end
and
of
a lot of times, like when we go, say we go into a house for a burglary.
Go through to the end of this one?
It's just
he'll
nasty.
analyze
You
it
never
after
get
she stops talking.
results from that, just from the filth.
It was so first of all, let's talk about the physical evidence transfer. The hood of a car is very good for both identifying visual prints, but also for identifying latent prints and for pulling them. The next statement was to explain that was his car was filthy. In fact, they went on, she used the word nasty.
It was absolutely nasty.
Immediately, her emotional response goes way up. She knows that she's got a problem because there should have been fingerprints. And two, she, instead of dealing with that, she starts characterizing the defendant in a very negative way.
Pigsty,
It was
she
so inappropriate. And I can't even begin to tell you the problem that I have with that, because it gives us a real quick peek inside of her mind. She's not talking about the car, she's talking about Daniel.
Yeah.
She's trying to vouch for her lack of evidence by talking about his character. And that is, emotionally, that works so well with people. That's what we've been trained to think that way. Oh, his car's nasty, he's guilty. An investigator who thinks that way has a threshold problem with objectivity and really needs to find a new profession. What's really interesting to me is him, the detective. He immediately is not willing to take any responsibility for anything that's happened. He's like, she said it was, and she's smarter than me, and she's been doing this longer.
Yeah.
Her whole thing is, well, I've worked hundreds of cases. Experience is not a shield to scientific scrutiny. Experience is something you demonstrate by doing your due diligence and following your protocols. So when someone uses their experience to explain why they didn't do their job, that to me is an oxymoron. I would want to go and look at every single case she's worked at to see whether or not she did this based on a feeling.
She's acting as an advocate?
She's acting as an advocate for the victim instead of an advocate for the truth, to find the truth. That's the job, to uphold the Constitution.
That's a Liberty Bird
like
shit right
everybody
there.
in the case, not just one person that she likes or dislikes or finds nasty. That's not what you do. The science has proven over and over again that detectives cannot tell. It's no better than a coin toss, whether you can tell where someone's lying to me. That's why we bother to employ people at a crime lab. That's why we bother to test evidence, because people do lie and they get ground balls by you all the time because you're not paying attention, because you think you're a super cop. You think you're a super lie detector.
Yeah.
You're not. It's not how it works.
This was an interesting phenomenon because you had the procurement of the 13 accusers, and
That's a great word for it.
There were 8 out of the 13 on whose charges Daniel was found guilty, and it was a mishmash of almost random or splitting the baby is how both the detectives and government officials have put their description of the verdict.
They split the baby on.
They split the baby. Is that justice?
Well, that's how they perceived.
That's
You
how it
had
works.
5 of the accusers on whose charges Daniel was completely cleared of. There just seemed to be a randomness about it. There was one, Shardarian Hill, who was caught at the end of her interview with Rocky Gregory saying, is this good evidence? She sort of stretched her arms out as if it was all in a day's work and said, the phrase was, quote,
even if he didn't even write nobody nothing, he's been in contact with people that he was arrested.
because he had contacted these women, somehow he deserved to face some sort of legal consequences for that.
And that's advocacy one way or the other. You essentially assume the premise in order to prove the argument. And that's, again, a logical flaw. It's what happens when you have detectives who are not properly educated. You have people who are functionally, logically illiterate, who are advocates running cases instead of people who have proper education and proper scientific and investigative protocol.
As the case attracted national media attention, there were many opportunists who came forward, and
We call
also
them false reporters, but yes.
false reporters that,
Right.
that piled on. So I wanted to ask you about Shawnee Sparksdale. This is a picture of her. She is one of the many women, and one man, by the way, who came forward in the course of all of the media frenzy to claim that they had also been sexually molested or assaulted by Daniel Holtzclaw. And I want you to take a look at some of the video of her interview.
We don't want this guy out here hurting our own citizens. There's others out there that's real. If I didn't have to work on this case, okay, and try to track down real victims, because I've had to go to a lot of women this stuff happened with, okay, they didn't come forward. I've had to go find them, okay? If I didn't have that real thing to do right now, I probably would arrest you.
I am astonished, not only that she was not arrested on the site, but that he acknowledges that he should have arrested her and didn't. When you have somebody who's a false reporter and they're willing to do this, very often false reporting is associated with other incidents. They're not just doing it one time. So if you arrest one time, you're preventing not one false reporter, you're preventing the 20 more that are going to come later on in their life. because they're going to realize, once they realize it works and there's no consequences, they're going to keep doing it. She should have been arrested. And he acknowledges that in the interview. And that fact is, what it tells you is how fast and loose they're playing with the law. But more importantly, it gave you an insight into his thinking. If I just had good evidence, some people making a good statements, I could just I could arrest this guy. He's looking for that golden ticket, and he couldn't find it.
And the only difference between women that they determined were lying and women who they determined were telling the truth was it needed to match up with the GPS and AVL information. So the same way that they applied that to the presence of DNA, they applied it to, well, if the GPS showed that Daniel was in a certain place, ergo, a sexual assault must have occurred.
It's completely improper, but it goes right back to basic interview interrogation techniques. He's not thinking like a detective, he's not thinking like a truth seeker, he's not thinking like he cares about what actually happened. And they're using GPS data in that same fashion. With this, therefore, because of this. That's not how it works, and that does not create good truth seeking.
It's terrifying.
No, but it's common. It's the way that law enforcement investigates cases. They trace statements instead of evidence. They don't follow the evidence. They don't let the evidence tell them what happened. They decide what happened, and then they try to cherry pick the evidence to fit their narrative.
All right.
7 months after Shawnee Barksdale admitted.
What's your thoughts on that, Katie?
Well, I mean, Jesus. He should have never, the system is freaking broken. That's what it is, because he's right. I mean, there are so many innocent people in prison because some super cop had a feeling, or because, you know, whatever, they're trying to show the community, or because someone wants to get reelected. It's so freaking political, and shit like that has destroyed countless numbers of innocent people and their families. I can't list off to you how many wrongful conviction cases I follow that are tragic.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
Well, I reached out to the Oklahoma City Prison Project. I don't think that's Expose Oklahoma, the city. Are you familiar with that Facebook group?
I'm not, but I'll check it out.
And I'm getting her on the show.
Okay.
Where we've been emailing back and forth on working on a schedule. It is essentially injustice in Oklahoma exposed. And she's got quite a lot of extensiveness on major prison constitutional violations in the prison system.
Yeah.
And we're going to be breaking down those in detail. Liberty Bird, what's your thoughts on what you just heard and what you just saw?
You know, I think that I've seen a whole lot out of that, and I think that the information that was just presented, especially the interviews with the so-called victims, shows some serious issues with the way that we gather our intelligence and evidence against other people, including now eyewitnesses. That was a sick and gross display of the abuse of authority for whatever agenda. There's obviously an agenda. If it's transpiring in the fashion that I just seen it transpire,
right?
Which I can't say I didn't see with my own eyes now. Yeah, they absolutely went after this guy in a malicious fashion, and
So
to
let's
suit
look at
some
the
type
profile.
of agenda.
Let's look at the profile, because that's something that's always key. You know, look at the victim profile. Here we go.
It was just demographics of where he worked on how it turned out to be mostly black women.
Do you think he was racist?
No.
No.
And so you think he targeted black women because they just happened to be in the area that he worked?
I think if he worked the South Side, he would have targeted Hispanic women. If he would have worked in our Asian community, he would have targeted Asian women. I think it's just where he worked.
A lot of the public perceives this case, though, through a racial lens. And, you know, in terms of the social climate around the trial, this is what attracted the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of the groups that showed up at trial, because
They saw it through a very specific, narrowly racially defined lens. This was a quote-unquote white cop who targeted black women. But you're saying that if he had worked in the Hispanic area or the white area, that he would have.
That's what I think.
Yes.
This is popular right now.
Yeah.
The black versus white thing is popular right now.
Mhm.
So, and people grab hold of that, of the popular thing. In 2 years, something else is going to be popular.
Wow.
There you go. Flavor of the day is what
Wow,
they both described it as flavor of the day.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
She's really smart. Smart copper.
So I think I have a little bit of a pressure lifted off my shoulders because this is what I want to do. I want to not end the series here. I want to do a mega panel in a week or two. Get everyone's schedule, try to get everybody locked down, get Michelle, get Brian, get all the key players we featured today in the past 3 weeks on one panel. I think that would be epic. I think that'd be great. It'd be a great way to break down everything that's been discussed and, you know, looking ahead and seeing what can be done, Katie, is kind of the big thing here, right?
Right, exactly.
So what do you think about that panel idea, like a mega panel? It's going to be, you know, a 1K mega panel. We'll have 1,000 subs then. And I think it'll be good to do a mega panel, like get everybody on there at once. And I think, you know, it's good that we definitely changed some minds with this.
Yeah. I mean, I hope it would be so nice to have Brian Bates on because
Absolutely.
he knows the case forwards and backwards. He's lived it and then written about it in a
Right.
podcast. And I mean, I know Michelle's traveling a lot right now, so I hope that works.
That's the goal.
Okay.
That's the goal to do it.
It'd be really interesting.
What have I not discussed tonight that you want to get to before I wrap up?
Oh my gosh, we have covered so much tonight. I can't think of what to add.
That was my goal. I know I was all over the place, but I wanted to make sure I covered every base possible to educate people, you know, and we've had 30 people on consistently all night, so that's great. Yeah, let me go to Josiah and kind of get what questions. So let's kind of put Katie on the hot seat right now. Keep in mind we're 3.5 hours deep, so be careful. Were there any questions, Josiah, you have for her or no?
No, I couldn't even begin to formulate any questions because I am not familiar with the case at all.
Right.
Other than I don't have any statistics. Just watching, you know, bits and pieces doesn't allow me to have an opinion.
Right. All right. Let's go to Liberty Bird. I know we're running a little late on time here. We have a funeral to get to at 11 p.m. So we have to go get our hair done and get suited up and everything for that. Liberty Bird. What's your thoughts on everything that have went down today? Is it fair to say, Liberty, that potentially your opinion has been changed on this?
I think that I'm definitely seeing some bias, and I can relate to that in my personal experiences. And so, yeah, it makes me much more skeptical about the information that was presented to the jury, just based on the fact that I've seen how the evidence was collected.
Do you got any questions for her while we have her?
You know, I would say it's just been great to actually sit on a panel with Kate and go over these kind of things, because like it's definitely piques my interest, and I think that it piques everybody else's interest, so that's great. I guess my only question would be, if you had the chance to attack government transparency or the lack thereof that presents itself in the same face of issues, would you be interested in getting involved in any of that?
Yes, I'm involved.
She already is. That's why we're working together on other
I'm always
cases.
interested in hearing what else you're doing. So let's connect over on Daniel's Truth. I would love to talk to you.
He doesn't know Discord. He got very overwhelmed by Discord, by all the buttons and all the features that he.
There's a lot, yeah.
He literally put himself in timeout and flipped out because it was just too overwhelming for him with Discord.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to like walk him through it and calm him down and hold his hand with it. But he definitely needs to get back into Discord, and there's a lot of outlets for you. I will if you want to DM me, Katie, what to send him, I'll text it to him so he has everything.
You can send him my email address.
All right, that works.
Okay. Nice. So yeah, I'll send you an overview of some fun stuff we're doing with the general counsel at CSU. It's quite interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, but don't mention the funeral you're doing in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to mention that part with her, because she won't think you're cool if you do that.
Right.
It was nice. It was really nice having the discussion with you, though. Thanks so much.
Awesome. So I am going to say this series will be to be continued, because we're going to do a mega panel in a couple weeks, and we're going to get everybody on and get schedules down, and whatever we did not cover, there's so much that we didn't cover. Holtzclawtrial.com. Check out Brian Bates, Michelle Malkin, multiple Facebook groups, Discord. Go to the Discord, Daniel's Den. That is the place to be for any Daniel information. Follow us on Discord as well. Please like, share, and subscribe. We're about 40 subs away from 1,000. Thank you so much. We will be back. Yes, I just gave you 3.5 hours. We'll be back in 2 hours. Not even 2 hours. We'll be back in an hour and 20 minutes for the funeral of accountability for all. We will see you then.